Welcome, everyone. I now call the July 30th, 2024 Special Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this point, we'll take a moment to take roll call of the council members by position number. Please say here when the city clerk calls your name. City clerk?
Thank you. Councilmember Zorns? Mayor Thompson?
Here.
Councilmember Alderks?
Here.
Councilmember Kurd?
Here.
Councilmember Mankey?
Here.
Councilmember Dodd?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Here.
All present with the exception of Councilmember Zorns, who is absent and excused.
Thank you. Before we continue with the rest of the agenda, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For remote meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently, and mute your microphone when not speaking. First up on the agenda is meeting agenda approval. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll go to public engagement opportunities. We have Makers on Main Street, Friday, August 2nd from 6 to 9 p.m. at Main Street and 101st Avenue Northeast. It's going to be an outdoor night market where attendees can shop, dine, gather, and listen to live music from Jeannie Rack and Robbie Christmas. Primary election day is Tuesday, August 6th. Ballot drop boxes, including those at Bothell Library and on the UW Bothell campus, are now open. You may also vote by mail or in person at a vote center. Ballots must be received by 8 p.m. on election day. And the same day is National Night Out, a community building event where you can plan a neighborhood block party and optionally invite a Bothell PD officer to attend. Register your event through the city website. All right, next up is public comment. The city has accepted public comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the city clerk no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all city council members and are part of the record. When the clerk calls your name, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that council will receive your input, but upon the advice of our city attorney, we do not engage in discussion of these topics. Staff will make note of items requiring follow-up. City clerk?
Thank you. Before I begin, I will say public comments shall be limited to the topics concerning current, future, or requested city projects, actions, programs, plans, and regulations. Comments not pertaining to these subject matters are not germane and may result in the speaker's comments being suspended. When your 3 minutes start, the light at the dais will turn green. At 1 minute left, it will start blinking, and at 30 seconds left, it will turn yellow. Before we call on live speakers, we did receive written comment from Mark Swanson regarding opposition to AB 24-124, tire wear particle pollution, and Lot P valuation. We also received written comment from Chris Jones regarding opposition to Lot P transfer to the Bothell United Methodist Church. Those comments will be made part of the record. We have one person signed up to speak tonight, and that is Mark Swanson. And so we will bring him in. Mr. Swanson, can you hear me?
I can, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can begin. You'll have 3 minutes.
Greetings, all. I'm opposing that you affirm the comprehensive plan and the projected targets. HB 1110 spells it out that the Office of Financial Management is their population projections are the law. The Planning Commission does not get to pick the higher number of the Puget Sound Regional Council just at the drop of a hat. Puget Sound Regional Council figures we're going to add 1.8 million people in the 4 counties they're responsible for, which represents almost a 50% increase between now and the year 2050. The legislative agenda that we're instructing our lobbyists, we are saying it's going to be 1.1 million between now and 2044. Well, none of those numbers stack up versus the GMA's projections of the 4 counties. In fact, we are 82,000 people underneath the projections for 2022 per the GMA projections, which we are held by law. Those are the numbers. So when the planning commissioners recommend to the council to pass a 1.8 million population increase figure, that means that between the 1.1 million we're instructing our lobbyists to go to Olympia for, the 1.1 from 1.1 million population increase from now until 2044, all of a sudden from 2044, we're going to go from 1.1 million to the PSRC's estimate of 1.8, 700,000 in the 4-county region, when we're already 82,712 underneath the 2022 projection by the Office of Financial Management. So we can sit still at our current rate of growth for 2 years without adding any housing, except for, of course, requirements of HB 1220. But the bottom line is HB 1220 is not the end-all be-all. We can't do whatever we want to destroy our flora, our fauna, our fish, our streams. So what I'm asking the council to do here tonight, go back.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Your time is up. That is all I'm showing signed up this evening. If anybody else is in the audience who wishes to speak, please step to the podium. You'll have 3 minutes. And if you're in the virtual audience, please use the raise hand function and we will panel you in. That is all I have, Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, City Clerk. Next up is reports. So I'm going to kick it over to the city manager for the city manager report.
Thank you, Mayor. And we do have a staff report tonight, followed by a board and commission update. I'll invite Anand to come to the table. And as he does, just as a reminder for anyone following at home, the council will take a recess over the month of August. So tonight's meeting will be the last one until September 3rd. So we'll have Labor Day, and then we'll be ready to have a meeting. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. As mentioned, we do have one staff briefing on the agenda tonight, and that is an update on the Human Services Needs Assessment and the initial results. We're joined by our consultant tonight, but I'm going to turn things over to Anand Mantrapagana, our Human Services Coordinator, to lead the discussion. He's joined by our Assistant City Manager, Becky Range. Anand?
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council members. My name is Anand Mantrapagana, and I'm the Human Services Coordinator for our city. Today, we are joined by Kone consultants, our consultants who have been working with us on our Human Services Needs Assessment, and they're here to share their initial findings. You may recall that we started the project in October 2023 with a goal to learn more about Bothell's human services needs, challenges, and gaps. With that, I'll turn it over to our consultants.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Anand. Thank you all for the opportunity to present our initial findings. So today we will be providing an overview of the key highlights that emerged from our data collection and community engagement efforts over the last 9 months. So we can move on to the next slide, Anand. So here's our brief agenda for today. So we will be giving a brief 10-minute presentation on our methodology, an overview of Bothell's community profile, as well as some key themes and findings. And note that we have set aside about 10 minutes at the end of our presentation today for any questions that you may have for us. All right. Here is an overview of the methodology that we employed for this project. So we began by reviewing existing data to obtain a comprehensive understanding of human service trends, priority areas, and best practices. We also conducted 13 interviews with key stakeholders, including local nonprofits and community-based organizations. We also conducted 5 focus groups with social identity groups, including older adults, mobile home park residents, low-income and immigrant refugee families, and Spanish-speaking families. I want to give a big thank you here to the Center for Human Services, the North Shore Senior Center, North Shore School District, and NUSA for helping us host and recruit participants for those community focus groups. We also conducted an online community survey, as well as also held 3 strategic planning workshops with providers to develop goals and potential actions and performance measures to chart a path forward. So next, I will pass it over to Rebecca, who will be sharing some key demographics and data points.
Thanks, Christy. So I'm just going to cover a little bit about what we learned about the demographics for Bothell. First of all, we learned that 65% of residents were white. That's down from 80% in 2010. The 2 largest growing groups were Asians and multiracial individuals, which means that some of that difference is more of a recategorization, as a lot of them identified as white and something else. We also see the median age is 38, with 18% of Bothell residents being over the age of 60. 22% of residents are immigrants, and of those immigrants, 53% have a bachelor's degree or higher, and 9% of residents have 1 or more disabilities. Could I get that? Yep. So that about 9% of households fall below the federal poverty line. That said, the federal poverty line doesn't take into account just how expensive it live in this area. So we also use the stat, which is that 12% of households make less than $25,000 a year. There is a almost 4% unemployment rate, and about 3.5% of the households are on food stamps. The median cost of rent in Bothell is $1,600. However, the gross median rent, which takes into account utilities, fees, that kind of thing, is actually closer to $2,200. 17% of homeowners with a mortgage pay more than 35% of their income towards that mortgage, and 38% of renters pay more than 35% of their income towards rent, which we consider anybody paying more than 35% for rent or mortgage to be burdened by that cost. And finally, 24% of residents live alone, and of seniors, about 40% of seniors. So I'll pass it back to you, Christy.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So next, I'll be sharing some of the kind of high-level key themes and findings, which are synthesized across all of the data collection methods. So first, we have the needs and gaps that were identified by community members. So the first service gap was centered around Bothell's split counties. Community members reported that it is more difficult to find support services in Snohomish County than it is in the King County side of Bothell. Community members also expressed a need for more community education events and cultural support. And then in terms of barriers to access, these included things around inaccessible infrastructure, for example, a lack of sidewalks and low lighting, as well as limited transportation options. Some services are not accessible by bus, for example. Additionally, other services such as shuttle services often have long waiting lists. Next slide, please. So next are some identified enhancements in human services. So these are potential areas that the city could continue to expand and enhance to better serve the current needs in the community. So the first one here on the slide is improving mental health support. This was mentioned, improving support for all ages, but also many community members specifically mentioned that youth and older adults are particularly struggling in the community. Next is improved substance use disorder treatment and support. Providers are seeing an increased need in this area, especially after the pandemic. More domestic violence services. This is another need in the community that was mentioned by multiple providers. Improving support for older adults, especially for low income and the aging in place population. And then finally, improving support services for immigrants and refugees who are identified as a particularly underserved population in the community. And next slide, please. Thank you. So next are identified housing needs. Housing was a big topic of discussion throughout all of our community engagement events. So listed on the slide here are some of the key takeaways from those discussions with providers and community members. So the first two bullet points there, increase affordable housing and rental assistance. Providers mentioned they're seeing an increased need for more affordable housing, rental assistance, and tenant protections. Many community members are struggling with significant rent increases, with many facing eviction. And then the next bullet point there is increasing access to low barrier shelter options in Bothell. And more specifically, providers mentioned there's a need for an emergency severe weather shelter, including for cold weather and for hot and smoky weather. Next slide, please. Providers also noted that there's an opportunity to improve awareness and outreach to residents, as many folks don't know where to go to learn more about available resources. There's also a need for a centralized source of information on human services. And finally, stakeholders identified a need to increase collaboration and communication efforts between providers and the city. And some suggestions to improve awareness included an online resource guide that is specific to Bothell that outlines which services are available on the King County side as well as the Snohomish County side. Another suggestion was to develop a community resource hub to improve information sharing and communication. Next slide, please. And finally, we have some regional needs as well as some Bothell specific needs. So starting with those regional needs, some regional human service needs that require a more regional collaborative approach to address are affordable housing, mental health support, and substance use disorder treatment. And then in terms of Bothell specific needs, these are needs that are identified that are more unique to Bothell and that could be addressed at the city level. So Bothell is unique, as you know, and it's in that it is split into two counties. Community members share that this divide has appeared to impact eligibility for services, with many reporting that there are less support services on the Snohomish County side. And then lack of a visual income disparity. Stakeholders mentioned that there's a lot of hidden poverty in Bothell, stating that it is not always obvious that someone is struggling based on the outside of their home. This was mentioned with particular regard to older adults who are aging in place in their home. Then a lack of a severe weather shelter. Again, an emergency hot or cold weather shelter was mentioned as a need in Bothell. And then last but not least, information distribution about human services. This was related to the lack of a centralized source of human services information in the city. And that brings us to the end of this presentation. Again, I want to highlight that these are all more the high-level initial findings from our data collection and community engagement efforts. I want to take some time now to open it up for any questions. Please let me know if there's a specific slide that you would like us to go back to.
Councilmember Aldrichs.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for this presentation. I very much have been looking forward to hearing the results of the work that you all have been doing. And so first, I just want to say thank you. That this is really important for our community, that we are beginning to understand these things. The one area that I felt like you made it very clear that we don't have a good understanding right now is you called it the visual income disparity. And so I'm wondering, is that something that your organization could help us develop and figure out how to create that understanding in our community? Or how would we as a city want to pursue that?
Christy, we can field that question if you would like. I think there's a lot more digging into the data and studying a little bit more. And I think having that data and doing some education is probably the first step. I thought that was really interesting. We had a lot of internal discussion when we saw that item, because we anecdotally had believed that there are some in our community that don't understand that we do have people that are living in poverty. And so I think we'll do a lot more work on that for you.
I would welcome those efforts and love to learn more about how staff intends to pursue that information. Thank you.
Councilmember Menke.
Thank you, Mayor. Similar line of questioning for me. There was one slide that showed 19% of households had an income of under $25,000. And then just below that, it said that only 3.5 are currently utilizing SNAP benefits. I'm curious, is that because they have assets that are able to cover their expenses, or do they not know about it? Do we have any more information on that?
I don't have any more information off the top of my head. For the most part, I would say that we do see families kind of taking care of each other, kind of using their social support networks to make up the difference. We are seeing from the survey some issues with feeling stigmatized when looking for human services. So it may also be a stigma issue. Christy, you have any notes? Does that sound about? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think, there could be opportunity there as an action step for us to connect people to things that are already in existence that may be missed right now, or help people feel more comfortable utilizing services that are available to them. I know a lot of times people will not do that if they feel awkward about it, or feel like they're taking something that they feel like they may not be entitled to, but these things are there for them for these instances. So if we can help people feel more comfortable utilizing services, that would be great.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the information. One of the things, actually, two of my questions are already asked, so the benefit of going third, but I am hoping that in the future we can get a really county to county comparison of what's available and what's not, and that can lead kind of our advocacy as a city, because I think that we don't want to see those disparities. A family's needs don't really change over the county line, but I understand that just some partners aren't over that line. So anything we can do to help target our advocacy would be great, or identify ways the city could step in, or maybe hopefully best case scenario, a resource we just need to get plugged in South Snohomish County. But whatever it is, I'd love to know about it. Thank you.
Councilmember Kern.
Thanks for the presentation. This is really interesting information, and I know that a lot of work went into gathering it from so many people, so thank you. And thanks to the community for filling out the survey too. I wanted to ask a little bit more about some of the outreach and community education events and cultural support that was identified as a need. And I feel like a lot of times when governments prioritize serving underserved populations, there's a sense of we'll go to them, or we'll have an event and they'll come and get the services that they need, but that's not always the case. Oftentimes there are existing networks that it's incumbent on us to go to and meet the people where they are. And so I'm wondering a little bit about the paradigm that the city currently uses, and whether you feel like there are opportunities that we have to go out into the community rather than sort of setting up systems in place here that we ask people to come.
Yes, actually, we in fact had a community resource fair last year in November, where we invited service providers, around 10 to 15 service providers, and had around 100 community members attend. One of the actions that our consultants are recommending is to host these events in more frequency. So perhaps maybe instead of once a year, maybe host them once in every quarter. Partner up with different organizations, learn where organizations are hosting tables, and for us to set up tables over there as well.
Yeah, that's great. I also hear from community-based organizations that they have contact with the city, you specifically, so thank you for doing that, and I just really appreciate that we're embedding ourselves into the community too, not just asking for people to come and get the services they need from us.
I just want to say thanks for this as well. And I'm really excited about kind of what a lot of the conversation up here has been, is okay, now what? And I know we need this before the now what. So no stress, but how do we put legs on this? How do we fill some of the gaps? How do we, Councilmember Mankey brought up the, 3.5% on SNAP and 12% of households making less than $25,000. How do we help our community access those resources, and how do we take this information and do some good with it? So thank you. I think we're good.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Next up, we do have a report from under Board and Commission reports tonight. We will be hearing from our Parks Board Chair. I'm going to first call on Blaine Land, who is our Recreation and Community Event Coordinator, for an introduction.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council members. Tonight, I'm introducing the Parks Board Chairperson, Whitney Nigebauer, as she will be providing a quarterly update on behalf of the Parks and Recreation Board. I did want to preface that her presentation tonight will cover the following projects that they have been a part of this past quarter. So you will hear about the Cedar Grove Park Inclusive Playground Conceptual Design Project, along with the Park of Bothell Landing Conceptual Design Project. In addition to that, you will hear about the Parks and Recreation Board and Arts Commission joint meeting. Other notes will be the donation for the Doug Allen Sports Field. And lastly, the board insight into the proposed 2031 Parks Capital Facilities Plan. So I want to give it over to Whitney to provide that presentation.
Thank you, Blaine. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. I'm here this evening to give our quarterly update from the Parks Board. At my last presentation, I offered information about the Parks Board involvement in the initial outreach engagement efforts for the Park at Bothell Landing Conceptual Design Project. Today, I will share some recent Parks Board initiatives and activities from the last quarter, of which there are quite a few. Before providing an update on the Park at Bothell Landing project, I first wanted to share about the Inclusive Playground project. The Inclusive Playground will replace the outdated Cedar Grove Playground, and at a later date, a second neighborhood park playground will also be replaced. For the Cedar Grove project, a community meeting was held in July 2023, then a workshop in November, and a survey which gathered feedback. The board participated in these and discussed the project at multiple touch points at our regular board meetings. Following a contractor-led assessment and analysis of feedback from the community, the Parks Board received 2 conceptual designs for the Inclusive Playground Replacement Project at Cedar Grove, prepared by the consultant, Harper's Playground. Both concepts featured elements designed for people of all abilities and ages. One significant difference between the 2 conceptual designs was the footprint. One included removal of the existing basketball court to expand the playground area. The board decided that this would not be in the best interest of the community and opted to maintain the current basketball court in place and consider ways of possibly facilitating adaptive sports in that space. Elements that rose to high importance were swings, slides, water play, sensory garden, seating, and walking paths, with considerations for shade, vegetation, safety, and maintenance. These include safety and cleanliness of the sand, water, and the direction of slides in relation to the sun, so they do not get really hot. The board also discussed using design elements to provide some level of containment rather than using fencing. The board selected alternative A with some select modifications to this design. Park staff also held stakeholder meetings with Kindering, Alyssa Burnett Adult Life Center, Sorensen Early Childhood Center, Northwest Child, Aaron's Place, and Heather Feldner of the University of Washington, and also Parks maintenance staff members. One of the significant things that we're proud of is the time taken to solicit feedback from professionals in different fields. The next step is for the consultant to incorporate feedback into the design from the Parks Board, community, and stakeholders. This refined design is expected at the end of 2024, and there's also some ongoing site assessment right now. Returning to the Park at Bothell Landing project now, as a board, we've been working on this initiative since October 2023. Since that time, there have been 3 open houses, 2 community surveys, and staff met with stakeholder groups. The Parks Board has also met with the consultants on this project twice during our regular meetings. In May, the Parks Board reviewed the 3 conceptual designs for the Park at Bothell Landing. These are the same designs that you have also seen in a past study session. While at this stage, the board did not select a preferred alternative, we provided feedback on all of the concepts and components to the consultant to refine the design. To summarize this discussion, the board recognized the importance of the park located right in the heart of our city. The board emphasized safety and accessibility in multiple entry points to the park, supporting the overhead walkway while also recognizing how challenging this would be to develop. Parking was, of course, an item of discussion, with the board preferring to capitalize on pedestrian and bike access while minimizing the parking to ADA spots, a drop-off loop, and parking that would be associated with a potential rental community facility. The board suggested incorporating active recreational elements and event space that would also complement the natural beauty of the riverfront. The consultant is currently taking input from open houses, community surveys, stakeholders, and is refining the next conceptual design. The Parks Board expects to see this early fall of 2024. Both of these projects have natural overlap with the Arts Commission. So myself and the chair of the Arts Commission have met to discuss our respective projects and have attended each other's meetings, and we would like to pursue options for joint meetings in the future. At our June Parks Board meeting, we discussed a donation from the former Bothell Parks Foundation. They had previously raised $5,000 for a replacement dog statue at the Doug Allen Sports Fields, which was honoring the loyal canine companion of the late Doug Allen. A representative reached out to the board to finish this donation to the Parks and Recreation Department. The Parks Board discussed this topic and decided to reach out to the family of Doug Allen to understand more about their wishes on this topic. In July, our Finance Director Quan Wong and Gretchen Zundel, Senior Financial Analyst, gave a presentation about the proposed 2025-2031 Capital Facilities Plan with an overview for the city and parks projects. You will be hearing more about this later tonight. The Parks Board supports the proposed CFP projects and provides the following feedback. With increasing development, we encourage a strong focus on parks acquisition projects while also allowing for the community recreational opportunities and conservation of land. Simultaneously, it is critical to maintain existing facilities and invest in the development of parks, especially where those processes have already begun. The board is also supportive of funding sources, including a levy or bond that will support and accelerate the projects listed in the CFP. Parks are important to our community for mental health, physical fitness, belonging, and ecological conservation. Finally, the Parks Board members also volunteered at the 4th of July parade, which was an amazing community celebration, and they also are participating in the Friday night events as well. Any comments or questions?
Councilmember Aldrich?
Well, I love hearing this update. You certainly have been busy. And I'm really glad to hear that the Parks Board members are able to participate in some of in volunteering outside of, your everyday meeting. I think that when I've spoken with Park Board's member, they're hungry to be involved in those opportunities, and so I'm glad that they're getting them. So I know that recently there was a change in how your meetings were shared to the public. And so I think only maybe two or three of your meetings have been put on YouTube. Is that correct?
We started that in May, so
In May, okay.
That would be correct.
All right. So I'm really glad you're doing that. And I'm also very sad that March is not up, because I would really love to see those conceptual designs from Cedar Grove. And so, yeah, that's really exciting that you got to see those. And I think as people want to be more informed about what's going on in the city, having those meetings available to the public is going to be really good. And so that maybe in the future we can all see the conceptual designs. So that's just a comment. I think I do know, you mentioned donations from the Parks Department, and that's been a conversation that's come up before. There are, I think, a number of community members and business partners in our area that would absolutely love to donate to our Parks Department. And I think the ongoing question that I've heard is, what is the process? How is that allowed? How does it work? How do we how do we manage those donations and then how can they be used, especially as a public entity. So I think what you've brought up about Doug Allen Sports Field is kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to a larger conversation. And I'm wondering, have you been having any of those conversations, and how's that going? And is there any answers for us going forward?
Councilmember Aldrich, that would be policy work that the staff can bring back to council for more information. I don't know that the Parks Board would be the ones that would look at the how, but they would certainly, once the policy was in place, have a say in how it would be done.
Okay, yeah. So I guess my question on the how is has the Parks Board made any recommendations along those lines to make a broader donation policy that Parks might be working on?
So I guess from the Parks Board perspective, we're looking at parks projects, and we're looking at, of course, ways to get them done and, ways to get them funded. Of course, we don't have our blinders on into the city of Bothell. We look around at what some of the other cities are doing. And there's a lot of opportunity for, businesses and sponsorships and things like that. Of course, donations as well. So yes, we are talking about that because the funding is the critical piece to get these projects done. In the case of the Bothell Parks Foundation, they had actually approached me about that donation, and were really open to doing other things aside from replacing that statue, which was a project that was actually initiated a number of years ago. So I brought it to the Parks Board to say, okay, what do you all think about how this donation might be best used? And that discussion then led back to the parents of Doug Allen, and so we'll pursue that in the upcoming months.
Well, and thank you for pursuing that conversation. My kids, we are very familiar with that statue, and we're very sad to see that it was damaged and not able to fulfill that monument that it was intended to be. And so, yeah, I hope you're able to continue those conversations and figure out a path forward. So thank you for leading on that. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Curd.
Thanks, and thanks for the presentation. Always good to hear what's going on with the Parks Board. I am encouraged by the interest in joint meetings, and I think that the variety of expertise and opinions and intersectionality of different identities on all of our boards and commissions are our strength. And so I'm encouraged to see that move forward, and I'm hoping that Parks Board will be able to meet with other boards and commissions as their needs intersect. So thanks for that.
Yeah, the logistics are complicated, of course, to make it happen. So sort of in the interim, we've been trying to have at least one member attend each other's meetings and then kind of report back. You think about these amazing Harper's Playground designs, a lot of them are incorporating that art. And, where a lot of us maybe on the Parks Board are artistic, a lot of us are not. And so having that great, feedback from the Arts Commission and, potential collaborations is really where it's at, so.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Thanks for the update. I really appreciate the deep dives you're doing into all these projects. And it seems like you're really doing them justice, which is greatly appreciated. And I just wanted to give a special shout out for working with the Arts Commission. That's really great to see and hear about, and we're all going to benefit from it. So thank you.
I guess I'd just echo the thanks. It's really cool, A, just to get these updates, but B, also to hear about the content of the updates and everything that's going on. And I'm pumped that you guys are working with the Arts Commission on this. I love to see that just happen because you guys are doing it. And I'm already looking forward to the next update.
All right.
So I think we're good.
At the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And there's no more reports under this section, so I'll turn it back over to you for the council.
Perfect.
Conversation.
Council committee reports, community reports, and conversations. Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Councilmember Mankey and I drew straws, and I'm going to give the North Shore Parks and Service Recreation Area update. So I'm going to run through a couple of different topics from our last meeting. We did complete, well, I say we didn't, but our consultant for NPRSA completed the community center needs assessment survey, and they're working on some site analysis. They gave us kind of 3 loose options based on all of the different needs that were identified. I really enjoyed that they were called lot of pool, no pool, and some pool. And the first and last were 4-acre sites. The middle was 2 acres. Next is kind of identify possible sites. It's really important that these are like transit accessible to really be all ages. And then just to get feedback from the community advisory group, which is made up of just a lot of great local community organizations. So that's kind of the community center update, which is still chugging along, but still very early in the process. The other thing is a possible request for quote for a levy consultant, whether that's the existing sort of levy structure that we have now, or also potentially for a community center levy is still kind of all up for debate. By that point in the meeting, Chair Srebnick had to leave for a conflict, so Vice Chair Dembowski from the King County Council was chairing, and he mentioned that there was some opposition to using NPRSA funds for a consultant because at the county level, there would be staff that did that. So he is going to investigate whether the county staff could assist NPRSA because we perhaps do not have as much staff there as we do at King County, as an understatement. So kind of more to come on there, but definitely curious in anyone's opinions on that and happy to advertise them to the board at the next meeting. The other thing that we talked about is just revisiting whether the Kenmore Senior Center, which is a City of Kenmore building within Rhododendron Park that is not owned by NPRSA, whereas the Senior Center is, but they do contract with the North Shore Senior Center, our tenant at our NPRSA building. And I know this is very specific, but that's because it's kind of an intricate thing. The building is in some disrepair. It was quoted that it may need up to $50,000 in fairly immediate repairs. Parts of it are not programmed because it is just not really safe to be in. So there's been some talk about whether we would in the future build into the levy repair work on that building, but obviously, the balance is, do we repair a building that NPRSA doesn't own? There was talk about maybe a cost-sharing fund where we would share the costs. So that's another item where I would, and I'm just going to speak for you, Councilmember Menke, that we would love feedback because I think it's very complicated and we all want to work together. It's pretty cool that we have cities and counties trying to find common ground, but it means that we have difficult conversations sometimes. And then the other thing is the pedestrian bridge repairs were delayed a little bit, but looks like I have notes they were scheduled for September and October, so soon. In this at the September meeting, we're going to talk more about the levy and at least get the scope for the next capital funding levy. And then in November, we will finalize our capital repairs plan and have a budget vote. And then in January, we will review the draft tenant agreement with the North Shore Senior Center. So there you go. Thanks, everybody.
Councilmember Curd.
Thanks. I attended our RIA 8 meeting. RIA 8 is Water Resource Inventory Area 8. And the state is split up into different watersheds, and this body is an intergovernmental board meant to help coalesce around salmon recovery, specifically Chinook salmon. And this meeting in July was interesting because it had a really fun tour of a site in Redmond. And it's interesting to go and visit and see the scale and magnitude of projects that are able to happen with public and private dollars. That was interesting. The update that I have to share about the board meeting was that there is an interlocal agreement. King County houses the staff that support the RIA 8 committee to do technical work and project coordination. I should say also that the city of Bothell does receive a lot of grant funding for salmon recovery and ecosystem restoration projects through this board, so it's really been really beneficial to be a part of. There are 29, or not 29, there are 19, I think, member jurisdictions involved, and so every couple of years the agreement that each member jurisdiction pays into expires and has to be redone. And so that's going to be coming up soon. We have draft language, and I am going to be forwarding it to legal first for a quick review before we go on to look at it and maybe agree to it as a council. And that will have to happen pretty quickly in September. And so I think that that will be coming down through either email for us to review individually and then kind of bring up at a meeting in September. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. That'll be coming into your inbox this summer. So please review.
Councilmember Aldrichs.
I have an update from the North King County Coalition on Homelessness. As everyone may be aware, there were a series of very hot days, and that prompted a heat response from KCRHA. So they coordinated heat responses and cooling shelters across King County. And there's a couple of additional services that they're providing to homeless service providers, including misters and box fans that can be loaned out from the Homeless Authority, and that staff will deliver to providers. So there is a website on the KCRHA website, a link on it for KCRHA heat smoke activation thresholds, and folks can, community partners can sign up and say, hey, please bring us some misters and box fans so that we can help keep our residents cool. Same thing with COVID-19 tests and personal protection. So masks and things from KCRHA. There is a sign-up sheet on the website where homeless service providers can get tests delivered to them. So that is something for our providers to know about, especially our human services agencies. And that's my update. We also did attend, are you, Deputy Mayor, are you going to do the update from Human Services? Okay, I'll do the Human Services update. We were able to meet and we reviewed we were informed that we were going to get the update that we got tonight, which we did. And but then we also talked about upcoming grant cycles and just sort of a survey of an overview of the providers that we've granted to in the past and applicants. So that process is ongoing as we develop the budget for the city. And those are my updates.
Councilmember Mankey.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to comment, a number of us got to take a tour of the Crisis Response Center yesterday. It is a great facility. They did a wonderful job with it. You don't always get an opportunity to do what you want when you're taking over a leased building and you're not building from scratch, but they managed to do an excellent job getting the building renovated, ensuring that all of the rooms have nice large windows for sunlight. Even though people are in the facility and they're not able to leave, they do have some actual great views outside of nature and things like that. So I just was very impressed with what Connections did with the building, and I'm excited that we have this facility in our backyard and available to our residents and residents of the area to utilize going forward. So very excited. I think they're going to open up. They're going to try to open up next week. They have a conditional use permit, but their target is by end of next week to open up and slowly roll it out. I think the facility will be full fairly quickly, and they won't have any challenge with that given the need in the community. But just very thankful that we, as a body, work together with 4 other cities to fund this and see it become a reality.
Since this is also time for conversation, I'm really glad that you were able to go and attend that, Councilmember Minke. So thanks for the update.
I'll jump in too. I had to miss it for work, so I'm looking. I don't know if I should be looking at Becky or Kyle or who. So just broad staff question. If there are any other times for surveys, I would love to go. I realize that maybe that was it, but that would be cool.
We can reach out and see if there's an available time, especially with the potential for opening August 5th. I mean, I think ideally it would be a good opportunity to tour prior to opening, but I know we've been in communication with staff and we'll Connections, and we'll find out some options.
Yeah. I also had a question right before I was like leaving to get ready, we got an email from Executive Summers about maybe needing someone to identify. Do we have enough time to do that when we come back in September, or do we need to talk about that today?
I believe that email was forwarded to me by the mayor, and we looked at it. I've asked Deputy City Manager Call to contact the staff member that was identified in the email to find out a little bit more about what they're looking for, who they're expecting, if it's elected, if it's staff, and get some more details. I think we can always wait. An old adage I remembered is when people are seeking volunteers, they'll always take you if you're the right person. So I think we can wait and see what happens and come back in September.
Okay, cool. I just had that in my mind because we're going on break. I appreciate it.
All right, moving on to projected agenda discussion. Nope, Councilmember Dodd.
It's me again. Councilmember Aldrichs brought up during the Parks Board update a question around accepting donations. I wanted to daylight that again during this section and just ask for kind of a review of what other cities can do and what would be possible in Bothell, what the challenges are, and just really understand. I feel like I hear things here and there, but I don't know that I can recall a good, solid, review of our options. So please either remind me that I already had one or let me know if that's...
No, that is some work that is underway, including in the scope is sponsorships around events. We'll bring back an update for council in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
All right, seeing nothing else, I would love to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councilmember Curd.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Curd and a second from Councilmember Alders to approve the consent agenda. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Funny, I didn't think so. City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Aldrichs?
Yes.
Councilmember Curd?
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcava?
Yes.
Passes 6-0 with Councilmember Zorns absent and excused.
Thank you. All right, moving into our first agenda bill of the night. Under ordinances and resolutions, we have Agenda Bill 24-125, a resolution opposing the Kroger Albertsons merger. City Manager Stannard.
Thank you, Mayor. And this was a request that was approved by council to move forward at our last meeting on July 16th. Councilmember Mankey had raised the question and had enough support. Staff has drafted a resolution based on the council conversation and comments. And then because he is the person who initiated, we also passed the draft resolution by Councilmember Mankey for a review. With that, there's no further staff presentation, but it's an opportunity for council to discuss the draft, make sure that it captures the sentiment that you were looking for. If adopted, then the staff will be following up with the entities that were identified of wanting to communicate with the expression of Bothell Council's opinion on this. So we will do that work over the break if approved. With that, I'll turn it over to you for conversation and consideration of adoption.
Councilmember Mankey.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to thank staff for the work on this. Thank council for a good discussion last week or last meeting, I guess 2 weeks ago now. I think the resolution covers everything we were looking to cover during our discussion. Protecting availability of choice for our residents, protecting workers' jobs from potentially being lost, displaying the history of what's occurred in the past and what's occurring right now in our city. And although it is very much a symbolic resolution, I think it's important for the parties to know how we feel as a city. So thank you for the work, staff, and thank you, council, for the discussion last week.
Councilmember Aldrichs.
I will just briefly say I concur. So I think it very much covers the intent that we discussed, and I'm ready to pass it.
I will entertain a motion
I will motion to approve the recommended action.
I'll second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Aldrich and a second from Councilmember Mankey to approve the recommended action. Is there a recommended action? There's not a recommended action, so I am going to ask for a motion to adopt the resolution.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the resolution opposing the Kroger Albertsons merger.
Second.
All right. I have a motion from Councilmember Mankey on the floor to approve the resolution. Would anybody like, and a second from Councilmember Aldrich, would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Mayor Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember Aldrich,
Yes.
Councilmember Kurd,
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Yes.
Passes 6-0 with Councilmember Zorns absent and excused.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have Agenda Bill 24126, Resolution Approving Amendment Number 2 to the Professional Services Agreement with MXM Landscape Architecture for final design of vehicle barriers for the Main and Festival Street Improvements Project. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And as you'll recall, this was a contract amendment that was up for consideration at 2 weeks ago. I almost said last week, even though we just covered that. 2 weeks ago. And Council had some questions and asked staff to do some more work. We are fortunate to be joined by our capital projects engineer, Nancy Bateman, who, as noted 2 weeks ago, was out of town. She is joined at the table by Deputy Public Works Director Steve Marakawa, who graciously pinch hit 2 weeks ago, but we're happy to have Nancy here as well. We've brought back, you'll see in your packet, there's 4 options for consideration, and to walk you through a little bit more background and those 4 options, I'm going to turn things over to Nancy.
Hello, Mayor Thompson and members of Bothell City Council. As was stated by City Manager, my name is Nancy Bateman. I'm a Capital Projects Engineer in the Public Works Department, and I'm here to present on the design of vehicle barriers for the Main and Festival Street Improvements Project. The council action that we would like to recommend is that council would choose option 1 to adopt the resolution for the MXM Amendment Number 2 in the amount of $40,438 as scoped.
Nancy, can you move the mic closer to you, please?
Closer? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Should I repeat that? Should I repeat that? Okay. Thank you. So this slide shows a map of Festival and Main Street areas. This is as Amendment Number 2 originally scoped, showing work on Festival Street, which is right here between City Hall and the Police Department, this block, and then the currently closed block of Main Street. Those are the blue areas. In addition, the red line is only tree removal and repair of the sidewalk to create an ADA pedestrian access route. This map shows an expanded scope where we would also install and design and install barriers on the block where the tree removal was in the previous slide. So it would connect the 2 blocks, Festival Street here to Main Street, and it would also include the intersections at 183rd and 101st and Main Street and 101st. So the 4 options that we came up with are shown on this slide. The first option is to adopt the resolution for MXM Amendment Number 2 as previously stated. Our recommendation is to move forward with this amendment. Even if you still want us to do more, we would recommend moving forward with this amendment at this time. Option number 2 is to adopt the resolution for MXM, the same amendment that is presented, and also direct staff to return in the fall with additional scope to include the expanded street, the second map that I showed you. The third option is to reject the resolution. Let me briefly speak to the first 2 before I move on, all right? I already told you number 1 is our current recommendation. Number 2, this option would allow staff to continue to work on the project. We can return with amendment number 3 for design of expanded street closure areas. It would not be precluded by passing the current proposed amendment number 2. The time it will take us to return to council with amendment, that would be number 3 for the expanded area, will be determined by the time required to scope the expanded work, the time required to negotiate the scope and fee with MXM, and the time to go through the internal process leading up to a future council date, which is 4 weeks for us. So then now to option number 3, which would be to reject the resolution, amendment number 2, and direct staff to pursue a full expanded scope as a new amendment number 2. This option would suspend all work on this project and would direct staff to negotiate a new amendment number 2. That would include the existing scope plus the expansion, which I mentioned. Certainly, we can come back if this is your choice, but please recognize that we're going to lose some time as we will not be working on the details of the bollard design if we're directed to stop and create a new resolution for amendment number 2. And then the fourth one is to reject the resolution and provide staff with other direction. Council may wish to have another option researched that we're not aware of, and certainly we're willing to do that if that's your direction. If you want us to do something else, we can always do that. So the bottom line is that our recommendation is to move forward with number 2, and that's what we are requesting tonight.
I'm going to jump in first because I think I was the one that pushed this the most last week. I was, given what we've got right here with the options that are available, I'm comfortable with the staff recommendation, and I know we're opening up the downtown plan early next year, and council will have a chance to weigh in on this then, and I'm looking forward to a chance to weigh in on this, and I'm comfortable with option 1 the staff recommends. Councilmember Curdy.
I'd like to move that we adopt the resolution for MXM amendment number 2 in the amount of $40,438 as scoped.
Second.
I have a motion to approve the recommended action from Councilmember Curd and a second from Councilmember Dodd. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none. City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alders?
Yes.
Councilmember Curd?
Yes.
Councilmember Menke?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 6-0 with Councilmember Zorns absent and excused.
All right. Next up is a study session, so we are going to take a break before then. It is 7:02 p.m. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back at 7:15. Or
Recording stopped.
7:17 with a 15-minute break. All right, welcome back. Next up, we have 2 study sessions. The first one is Agenda Bill 24127, a proposed 2025-2031 Capital Facilities Plan study session. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 2 study sessions tonight. There's some connection in that we are going to talk about capital facilities plan first, and you'll get a sense of what are the projects within a few of the elements. We do have an additional study session coming in the fall, which our finance director will cover. But they're all, as you hear the magic words, unfunded projects. The state isn't the only option, but it is an option. So as we talk about the state legislative policy, you can connect those 2 dots as we go. With that, just as a reminder and a piece of background, the council did ask for the CFP development conversations to come to study session and be processed here. But tonight you will also hear about how we've made sure to keep the voice of Planning Commission and Parks Board involved in the feedback. So you get to hear a report out on that too. So to walk us through the conversation, I'm going to first turn things over to our finance director, Quan Wong, and he will introduce other speakers and help us navigate through the conversation. Quan.
Thank you, Kyle, and good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council members. So tonight, we are coming back to you since June to give you an update on our 7-year CFP, or Capital Facilities Plan. So tonight, we will be walking you through our upcoming timeline, what we are planning to do with the next study session, and what we are planning to do during the budget process. I have with me Aaron Miller from the Parks Department to talk about the Parks project. I also have with me Steve Morikawa to talk about the transportation projects. For the next study session, we'll be focusing on the utility projects. That will be a main focus because we try to adopt the utility rates earlier than the regular budget adoption. I also have with me Gretchen from the Finance Department. She is the one behind the $435 million CFP. So I really thank you for her work. She's balancing the budget for us. So as the city manager mentioned, we have a lot of unfunded projects, and those are going to be on your list. But for the $435 million, we have secured funding. And half of that are from outside sources, like grants, like from Sound Transit, and also from the other agencies. So that's kind of the overview of what we are going to do tonight. So this is our second of our planned study sessions. We are asking for your feedback on the identified projects and programs. No action is required, but we would love to have the feedback from you. So for tonight's discussion, the first topic is really the CFP timeline, what we are planning to do and what we will try to accomplish. The second topic is CFP overview. I truly believe in one city, one budget. In the past, you may have a separate discussion on CFP away from the utility rates, away from the operating budget. But I truly believe they impact each other. So I encourage you to look at all of the budgets as one package, because as we invest in CFP, there will be ongoing M&O cost. So it is not just a separate program out there. So I want you to be aware that we are connecting them. And then we will go into the Parks project. Aaron will go through what we have and what we talked to the Parks Board about. And then last topic is the transportation projects. And Steve will walk you through those projects as well as report back from what we heard from the Parks Commission. So that's the plan for tonight. And you are welcome to ask us questions as we go through each category, or we can wait until the end to answer your questions. It's totally your preference. So the timeline, as I already mentioned, last June when we came here, since that meeting, staff updated the revenues, project costs, and schedules. We also presented the draft CFP to the Parks Board and the Planning Commission and got their feedback. So we'll hear from staff regarding those meetings. And we also briefed you during the first, and then tonight is the second study sessions. What's coming up, again, between now and September, we will still be doing staff work. So our work is not done. We'll continue to work on the projects. And again, the numbers are not final. Things will change between now and the time of the adoption of the budget. So we are still trying to monitor the revenues closely, and I will be giving you a full update in the September 3rd study session. We'll also plan to hold public hearings in October and in November. And then hopefully we'll have all the information for you and then schedule for your approval in November. So that's the plan. Quickly to go over the revenues, again, we'll have more details in September. We're still following very closely on the REIT revenue. We have heard good news that the Fed may lower the interest rate. Hopefully, then it will encourage more real estate excise tax. But right now, we are close to a forecast, but we do have enough funding to carry the 7-year CFP plan. I also want to highlight there is an opportunity for REIT 1 to lower the cost. We are looking at the City Hall. Perhaps there is an opportunity to refinance at the end of the year. So we hope to achieve some saving to bring the cost down. Transportation impact fee, about $2.4 million at the end of the 7th year. And then the parks impact fee. You may hear more about that during the presentation. And we did talk to the Parks Board about this potential funding, but it is very restricted. So we can't just spend it on anything. So with that, I will turn the mic to Aaron to talk to you about the Parks and Recreation CFP.
Thank you, Kwan, and thank you, Council, for this opportunity to present to you the Parks component of the CFP this evening. So I'd like to begin by giving you a brief overview and our parks strategy on how we're approaching the parks component of the proposed CFP. As you're aware, the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan is Parks and Recreation's guiding document, and it informs the projects that are in the CFP. In fact, all the projects we'll discuss here tonight have some connection to the PROS plan. So as Kwan mentioned, park projects are REIT eligible, and park impact fees are a large funding source for these projects. As you dive into the proposed CFP, you'll notice that there's several parks projects that are either unfunded or partially funded. And we also do have a fairly healthy 2031 end fund balance of park impact fees of around $8.6 million, which was shown on the previous slide. That is intentional in a strategy on parks part in that it allows us some flexibility moving forward as we develop some of these designs on some of these projects and look forward to future funding for construction, the construction pieces of these projects, as well as it allows us some flexibility for leveraging that money against future grant and funding sources. Additionally, in 2025, we'll be updating our PROS plan, and this allows us another opportunity to allocate that funding towards future projects in light of what priorities we hear from our community. So this slide here shows you the proposed funded and partially funded projects in the CFP. Of note of the funded projects, a new project that's not currently within the CFP is the inclusive playground at Cedar Grove Park. So this is a project we've been working on pretty consistently and put a lot of effort into over the last year or so. We are proposing that we fully fund this park development project using park impact fees. The partially funded projects that you see on your screen there, a lot of these are within the current CFP, other than the Downtown Parks Connectivity Project, which is a new one. Just of note, the synthetic turf replacement at North Creek Sports Field now includes synthetic turf at North Creek Field 3. Currently, that field is natural grass. And then the former Wayne Golf Course Trail Connector was previously or is currently a project that is concerned with trail development at the back 9 of the former Wayne Golf Course. We're proposing to alter this project to focus on design efforts towards a pedestrian bridge spanning Waynita Creek in coordination with the Sammamish River and Waynita Creek Restoration Project currently in design. And also on this slide, you'll see this is kind of a timeline that shows you proposed design and construction timelines. The blue is design efforts, green being construction efforts. So this slide here shows you unfunded proposed projects. Notably at the top of the screen there is a Shelton View property acquisition. This project currently in our CFP is titled North Bothell Acquisition. We changed the title of it. Parkland Acquisition Opportunities looks at acquisition identified in our PROS plan, acquisition relating to neighborhood parks, trails and river access, and also open space needs. Blythe Park improvements, Centennial Park improvements, East Norway Hill Park improvements build upon current master plans that are sitting on our shelves. It looks at design and construction of those parks. North Creek Forest looks at master planning that park. So on July 11th, Finance and Parks presented to the Parks Board an overview of the Parks component of the CFP and sought feedback from the board. In general, the board was supportive of staff's approach and priorities, and their priorities are identified on this slide. So the board is supportive of funding the current projects and has an interest in developing our newly acquired properties. There is a recognition that funding all these projects is a challenge, and staff is encouraged to explore several types of funding opportunities. And lastly, the acquisition of parklands is important as our city continues to develop. And this is balanced with the recognition that we must also continue to develop and provide active recreation opportunities for our community. So I'll pause there and allow for any time for comment or questions if the council so chooses.
Got a quick question. The skate park opportunity. I heard through the grapevine that there's a community member interested in funding part of that. Have they reached out at all to the Parks Department yet?
Yes, we are aware that there is an individual or a group of individuals that's interested in the skate park. So that is a project that's been in the CFP for some time. It's also a project that's within the realm of the conversation at the Park at Bothell Landing. So there could be some future opportunities.
Okay, I was just curious if that funding materialized, the funding that we were planning to spend on that park, we could then reallocate it to another project that may not have current funding.
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for being here and for bringing this to us. It sounds like you guys are already planning on using impact fees to construct the Cedar Grove playground, right? That you don't need like guidance from council to do that. Like that's the plan.
That's our proposal.
Okay. That's the proposal. Okay. So then we can express an opinion on that.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a good plan. So thank you for proposing it. I'm also looking on the slide about unfunded proposed projects. I know that you mean Shelton View Forest and that we're not acquiring all of the neighborhood of Shelton View. We will. And so I would just propose that we add forest to that, just so we're clear that it's the forest and we're not trying to like turn a neighborhood into a park.
We can.
I know, it's a lot of words, and also I just wouldn't want it to be misconstrued. And then this is maybe a syntax question. When you say parkland, is there a place in Bothell called parkland, or does that mean land that could be a park in the future?
It means land that can be a park in the future.
Cool.
So
because parkland is like the title of a place, right? And so I didn't know we had one.
Yeah. So we have really specific targets within our pros plan, and this item identifies those or attempts to address them.
And one of the priorities for that is Snohomish County.
Yes, Snohomish County, yes.
Yeah, great. That was for you.
That was my question.
So yes, and it's going to be really exciting to see the pros plan updated next year. It's, these plans are great. They provide really awesome guidance, and then they come to the end of their useful life, and it's time to update them. And I think we're feeling that. So it's good that it's coming up. Thank you for clarifying that about acquiring parkland, not the place, but in parks, land for parks in general. And then the last question I have is, since I don't see it listed up here, it came to our attention that the Haynes open space is owned by the city over this last year. Is there, and I believe it's acquired, but there's nothing planned for it. Is that something that is in the conversation about how the Haynes open space will be used in the future?
We don't have any current plans to develop that space. We just strictly categorize it as open space as it is.
Okay, and could that be added to the pros plan for next year as something that there's interest in planning for?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's I think what I would suggest, because right now people don't even know that it exists or that they can use it. There's no signage. And so I think it's just incredibly underutilized because people are completely unaware. And so I think having, even if the plan was signage, I think that's a great place to start. All right, thank you.
I'm going to piggyback off that really quick. I think just signage and like some way of telling the boundaries would help people. Also, what kind of uses would be a good thing to maybe put on the website? I haven't gone and explored it. I have a rough idea of where it is, but just safe ways to access it. Maybe that changes once the Bothell Way improvements are made, but like just a guide for people, because I think it's kind of like a point of curiosity right now, and maybe we can help people have a fun, safe time there. That's the most grown-up thing I've ever said, but I think that it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. So far, really interesting stuff. I have questions about acquisitions. In ecosystem restoration, acquisitions are a long-term vision. And so, like at my employer, we prioritize certain areas to acquire lands for ecosystem recovery. And then over time, those priority areas, as parcels become available, there's discussions about whether they should be acquired by the county or not. And so I'm wondering, from a parks perspective, the PROS plan identifies like general broad areas that acquisition should be done in, but are there more guiding principles or kind of guardrails around which properties, when they do become available, and when is the city going to take advantage of opportunities that come up versus, like, if a property is for sale, does the city jump on it or not? What are some of the considerations that go into that for the parkland acquisition opportunities?
So I'll take a stab at it, and I'll also allow Nick to jump in if he needs to. That's a really good question. So how we have this identified up here on the screen, we have acquisitions, and the timeline's relatively arbitrary because we don't know when those opportunities are going to rise. We identify them within our CFP and our PROS so that when those opportunities do arise, we can jump on them. We do have like a rough idea where those areas are located based on some of the gap analysis work that's completed within the PROS plan, but we don't have anything more specific than that, than just general locations. We also are aware of other properties that are out there. I mean, one example that's just right there out in the public right now is the Shelton View property. There's properties along those lines that we are aware of, and when those opportunities come up, there's going to be a lot more discussion on those when that opportunity arises.
So there's not like an active focus on acquisition where the city is proactively looking for properties that feed.
We will routinely kind of peruse what's available in the community, and we'll work with, like, for example, like our community development department to understand like what opportunities potentially are out there, and we'll be as prepared as we can be to seize on those opportunities when they arise.
Okay. And Councilmember Kurt, I would say too, to the other part of your question around process, state law does pretty much guide of when government agencies are doing property acquisitions. So there probably is a lot of similarities, while a different purpose and intent, a lot of similarities in process that you would be familiar with.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's an overarching strategy beyond just general areas of the city. So when do we know whether an opportunity, when it comes up, is something that the city should act on right away, or if it's something that is a little bit lower priority? I'm just wondering if the Parks team has kind of a set of guidance for that, or if that would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful. I think at this point we would be having a fair amount of discussion on whether or not that is an opportunity to seize on, given we don't have those guiding principles right now at our disposal. But yeah, that is as fast as properties turn over in this community.
And I think we can follow up maybe outside of the CFP conversation with more information about potential property acquisition. I'll also just note that this does show up on the unfunded aspect too. So some of it is getting ready for that. But so I think we have time.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
I guess I'm just building off of people today so far. I would love to set up an environment where the Parks Department has like budget set aside so that if a good sized parcel goes up for sale, they have a chance at getting it, especially in areas where we just don't have parks or park opportunities. I worry that with it being unfunded and without maybe a set direction that like, yes, you can spend X amount acquiring land, that we might miss an opportunity by the time that goes through all the different people that would need to weigh in. Or is that worry not?
I think that's why we have a 7-year CFP plan, right?
Yeah.
It's not everything on the list is going to be funded. And we have to make choices among even those over 100 or so projects.
Yeah.
So maybe it is a good discussion on the guiding principles, but we also need to talk about how much we can afford. Even an opportunity arises, we don't know what is the next opportunity that we might have missed because of the rush to action. So that's why we have a longer range plan for what we should be doing and prioritize them.
And that makes sense. And what a problem to have that we have so many parks that we are building and funding and like, so I don't want to undersell that part either.
Yeah. Any other? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I do like the idea of having like a set aside fund so that if we do need, if there is an opportunity to make a quick purchase because something becomes available in the perfect place, that that we would at least be prepared to act. And so I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna say one more thing associated with that. We did just receive an email from Executive Summers about Land Conservation Initiative, which is, full disclosure, is in my department at Snohomish County. But I think that some of the conversations that we're having about being ready for properties when they do become available, and do we have the economic resources to jump on them, might be a more regional conversation too that we could participate in. And so whether that's an elected person on that body or a staff person, I think that these conversations are really helpful, and I think that we can elevate them a little bit higher, especially in the Snohomish County side. So
that's a good point. Thank you. Okay, if no further question, we'll oh, sorry, Mayor.
I've been waiting.
Okay.
And I don't have a lot. I would just like to echo the conversation that's been had. Like, obviously, we plan things out over a longer time horizon, but at some point in time, we're going to have to take action when a property is actually available. And I like the idea of being well positioned to do that. Should there be an opportunity that is just on the market, and we know those don't last long around here. The second question I had was, I think may have been answered, but just piggybacking off of what Councilmember Mankey said first, I was very pleased to notice that the pump track and skate park were funded for next year, but there's no home for them. I'm assuming that's like, we assume there's going to be a home at some point in time during one of these master plans, and we're just ready when that happens, or is there a location that we're looking at?
Well, the skate park and pump track is something we're talking about at the Park at Bothell Landing as a possibility. I don't know whether at this point whether it's going to land there. We do have funding available for feasibility of siting that pump track and skate park, and we do have some ideas potentially on how we could bridge the gap between a permanent one and potentially providing a temporary one in the meantime.
Cool. Awesome. I love it. That's all I've got.
Great. We'll move on to the transportation projects, and Steve will guide us through.
So next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. So good evening. A fairly detailed write-up was included in your packet as attachment 3, I believe. So I'm going to try to hit on the highlights, especially where we would want your input or confirmation that our direction's kind of in the right direction. So first of all, projects that are transportation projects that are entered into the capital facility plan come from other planning processes. Typically, they've gone through a public outreach process and an approval process of some sort. And while the 20-year comprehensive plan is the primary source of project, it gets fed into things like the adopted bike plan and the sidewalk prioritization, which you guys have seen. So the CFP is pretty much a 7-year subset of the 20-year transportation plan that we're currently working on as part of the comp plan. And I think I talked to you guys in June, pretty much the transportation section of the CFP is really equivalent to our 6-year TIP. It's really the same thing, and we use our CFP process. So every 2 years with the capital facility plan, my recommendations, the same thing, is to continue to finish projects that have grants, because typically if you get a grant, they want you to finish the project, and if you don't finish it, then we're returning money. It's also recommended to continue funding on transportation operating programs such as the sidewalk and walkway program, the annual pavement preservation program, bridge inspection and maintenance, on the bicycle safety, and even our comp plan, the TE element. It's a small program. We need to do all our comp plan stuff. You can stay right there. So again, your packet goes through a lot of the kind of the changes from the old existing adopted CFP to the new one. If what you see in attachment 3, the project hasn't been really discussed. What has happened with the project is the schedule, the cost, and everything have been updated. So the 3 things I do want to kind of point out, though, is where there's been some, we're actually requesting money that hasn't already been assigned to a project or something. So I wanted to point these out. So the first one is T92, which is the 240th, 35th intersection, which is just north of Montevilla Business Park. And currently it's a 4-way stop. And we recently did kind of a study on traffic signal roundabout, and roundabout works and works well. We received the $895,000 grant through the federal program, of which we tossed in $163,000 of safety program funds. So because of this opportunity and the timing of it all, we didn't have time to come to the council. We did have safety program money, and roundabouts are safety facilities. So that's what we used in there to assure the grant agency that we had the funding. I am requesting that we replace that with transportation impact fee funds, because we do have more transportation impact fee funds. And then I can use the $163,000 and stick it back in our safety program, which does smaller projects, and that $163,000 makes a lot more impact in that safety program. I think it's shown like that already in the project sheet. OP16 is one of our programs, an annual program. We're recommending creating one that's called Traffic Equipment Asset Replacement Program. Not very exciting. But in the last couple of years, we've had about $150,000 of unanticipated equipment requiring replacement for various reasons, like lightning strike, vehicular collision, and the insurance doesn't cover it all. Even obsolete software, all our traffic signals are software-based now, and they do get old, and they need to be updated, and it costs us money. And we don't have a bucket. So we're recommending that we put in $75,000 a year as a bucket for these incidents and upgrades. The other one is OP17, which is a resiliency program, and that's recommended at $70,000 per year. And it would address over a period of time things such as, but not necessarily limited to, like backup power for traffic signals, traffic signal cameras, landslide investigations. There's a few areas in our city for resiliency purposes. If there's an earthquake, we're not quite sure what that slope's going to do. We'd like to find out and be ahead of that. And maybe even things like flood indicators, so we don't need people to actually go out there and determine if roadways are being overtopped. We can basically use an instrument. Next slide, please. So a few things to consider in the future. Safe Streets and Sidewalk Levy expires at the end of 2025. This funding, there's no source of funding that has been installed beyond that to replace that funding right now. So there is a gap in things like the pavement preservation sidewalk program and the crosswalk program starting in 2026 are going to have quite a bit of a reduced amount of funding behind them. Crosswalk program is actually going to have zero because that's totally funded by the levy. There are 4 projects that we're going to likely try to finish. 130th and 132nd sidewalk project. There's a rectangular rapid flashing beacon at school crosswalks that we got grant funding for. There's an overlay project and sidewalk on 224th. So 2 of those have received grants. The 2 sidewalk projects have applications in along with 2 other sidewalk projects. If we're fortunate enough to get grants, we might get more than this work done, but we think at least we'll get this done with the remaining levy funding. I would also point out that the bike program right now is funded by just REAP 2 funding, and there's a limited amount in there. And if there is some sort of funding mechanism in the future, that's something that be thought about in addition to the sidewalk program. We have found funding. REAP 2 funds are one-time funds, and in the past, unfortunately, we use them for things like Canyon Park Transportation Demand Management Program, TDM program. We also used it for things like our comp plan transportation element update, but technically you can't do that. So we have found one-time funds to get through 25 and 26, but coming in 27, those are a couple of programs that we'll need to find a source of funding for. And we want to do our downtown TDM, so that would be similar. And it's interesting, but one of the things I really want to do is education for some of these things, especially safety education and bike program education. Technically, again, you can't really use REAP 2 funds for those kind of things. You don't need much, but it can't be REAP 2. And then the last thing to think about, unfortunately, well, 2 more things. Downtown cleanup. Right now, it shows a $2.2 million unsecured funding. That's kind of our contingency. We're not quite sure how well our current plan will work. It's all underground. You're never quite sure. But we just want to point out that there could be a need to fund that in the future. And I think that's a few years down the road. And then the last thing is on most projects, individual projects, you'll see a spreadsheet a table at the very bottom of each project, and it's called maintenance and operations. And that's our operations group best estimate at what's going to take year in and year out to maintain when we build something new. So you won't see it on things like pavement preservation projects or probably like utility pipe replacement projects because they're actually the maintenance and the upkeep. But you will see it on new roads and new sidewalks and things because there is a cost on that. And year in, year out, those things should become part of our budget in the future. Next slide, please. So a couple of things we heard from the Planning Commission. It was a great discussion for transportation. One of the things was to increase awareness to the community regarding completed projects. And I think the intent there was not just a ribbon cutting ceremony, but more like something like making sure the community is aware of all the opportunities they have because of the new projects. And to me, an example of that is like when we daylighted Horse Creek. It's a great walking corridor, and do people realize that is a great walking corridor? So I think one of the Planning Commission members had that as an idea. Another one wanted us to develop heat maps or show at least where the projects were related to the city so that we could see where they're located relative to marginalized communities. So we did provide 2 maps inside your packet to show those. I'll have them in the next 2 slides if you want to see them. They really wanted us to address safety at the North Creek crossing of I-405 at Beardsley and 195th. The resiliency program that we're proposing, they felt was really important. And the last thing that they said essentially is if resources are limited, potentially consider focusing on that crossing of North Creek Trail up at 195th and maybe East Riverside Drive Trail before the actual Sammamish River Ped Bike Bridge. That was just the thought that they had. I will talk a little bit, go back to number 3. Just to let you know, the long-range plan for WashDOT for the I-405 at 195th is to replace that. That's the I-405 corridor long-range plan, but obviously it's way out. So one of the things we will probably look at is, under our safety program, is there anything we can do to create more visibility for those crossings, peds and bikes crossing? Probably not going to come up with something like a different bridge or anything like that. We'll probably have to wait for that interchange work. I think that's all I had. The last two slides, just to point it out, these were the two maps that we generated. These actually came from our draft comprehensive plan for socioeconomic. And this one is floodplains and critical facilities, which is interesting. But the map has a ton of information on it. It has schools, it has manufactured communities located on them. So it was great to kind of overlay where the projects were. And that's what I have.
Question. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you. This is very helpful. The question I have is about crosswalks. And I know the levy is expiring. We're probably going to have a conversation. Can you remind us on when that we're about to have a conversation around that safety, safe streets levy?
So we are doing staff work on options that will be prepared to bring back to council, perhaps in the October and November timeframe.
Okay, thank you. The reason I ask is that when I saw this, and we recently got the email from a resident who was videoing other residents trying to cross Montevilla and 39th there, and there's the trail on one side, and then there you have a lot of housing on this other side, and then it's going to be even more housing in the future. I don't know about near, but in the future. So, and that's a dangerous intersection because as you drive, I drive up that a lot since ICOB is right there. So
Right.
there's like, you have to, as a driver, there's a tiny hill and you barely see by the time you get to that intersection, it's already too late and cars do speed up quite a bit on that street.
Yeah.
So that particular one, we got that one as well. We do get a lot of customer action requests, tons of them, safety all over. So we're working through a lot of the safety issues, and one of the things that we've had a challenge over the last few years from a resource point of view addressing a lot of these, but we're trying to push out as much as we can. We got interdepartmental committee, I think I told you guys this, because it's fire, police, public works, to try to talk about all these things. So we actually are moving forward. We're having a package going out soon, I'm hoping in a week or two, with our first round of things like RRFB, which we happened to get just this last minute grant for. And we're going to put up speed radar things, not for ticketing, just for flashing to tell you your speed. We're trying to put together a second package. So there is some funds there, and that is one of them that we are looking at what we can do.
This is what's an example, but it's the larger conversations. How do you fund your safety program or whatever in the future, So that's
Right.
the larger conversation we probably need to have.
Yeah. So we do have, I think, combined with all those 4 smaller programs into one, we probably have $260,000 a year, which is not a whole lot, but fortunately, a lot of these, at least the first step in trying to get people to slow down, we can put some of those signs that show you your speed, and RRFBs aren't terribly expensive. So for $260 a year, we might be able to get one in a year or something like that. And then there are often safety grants. And so we are using this as a pot of money so that we can get and leverage more funds off of them.
Cool. Thank you.
Do we know, Steve, roughly how far out the 195th project is? I know that's a question to which there's probably not an answer, but are we talking like a decade, 3 decades? Like, what does that look like?
I've put it beyond the 20-year planning period.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 195th, part of the 405 master plan? Yeah. I would love to know what we could do to make that crossing safer, that wasn't spending a whole bunch of money on something that's going to get torn down by WashDOT eventually. So I appreciate that. I'd love to hear kind of what comes of that. The speed radar you mentioned, does that collect data, or does that just flash the speed? Like, can we tell here's how fast people are going from that?
I'd have to check on that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But we can check.
What would it look like if instead of putting the speed radars up there, if we put in physical constraints to slow people down? You know, we've got a lot of our neighboring communities use speed humps, speed bumps, whatever you call them, something that's not, you know, gonna wreck your vehicle if you go over it at 12 miles an hour, but you can kind of comfortably go over at 25, but not much faster.
So that is the hot topic right now in our interdepartmental committee. Right now, what we're doing is Public Works is doing a lot of research. There are many different ways to install them. There's different, you go to any agency, there's many different ways to put humps in, and there's pluses and minuses about each way. So how does it affect drainage? How does it affect bikes? Is it a safety issue if you put it in? And, you know, so there's a correct way to do them theoretically. So we're doing that, and we're going to bring it back to our committee, and that's one of the things we're trying to resolve at this point. Because Bothell has never had them, so it is kind of some inertia. We're trying to get through that, but we're trying to do it smartly. So when we do put it in, we can address all the concerns. And some of the concerns are response. How quickly can you respond? And does the fire truck and the police have to slow down to get over these things? And what is the wear and tear of doing that? So I think what it'll probably come down to is type and probably what type of roads that they're applicable to, I think.
Yeah.
But we are looking at them, yes.
Awesome. Just in a general sense, I would love to see some of those physical constraints, and if there's speed humps or if there's something else that we can put in. Like, I think that's gonna drive behavioral change a lot more than putting up a sign and asking people to go slower, and that certainly will help, like, don't get me wrong. But I would love to see some of those more permanent structural incentives put in as time goes on.
Mayor, can I jump in and ask if what you're referring to is like the traffic calming it through Conifer View?
Yeah.
Like, you know, the road gets narrower?
Yep.
Okay, those kinds of things. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
On that same note, I know different email about a crossing. This was getting to Sheltonview Elementary to cross Meridian, and just people kind of powering through the. There is a system there where you can push a button and it'll say, "Hey, people are crossing," but some people still view that as optional. And a raised crosswalk was advertised, and Meridian is a road that it's easy to speed on because it's a long stretch. There are parts of it that have very wide shoulders too, which people sometimes use to pass or just make other decisions that maybe we all wouldn't make. And I wonder, it reminds me of something I was talking to the city manager about, where we have a lot of dense housing off of very large roads, 5 lanes, 4 lanes, whatever. And then there's like a service or a park across the street. And we have, you know, like on kind of by Home Depot, there's like a lot of just like crosswalks to get across like a very large road. And I'm wondering what our kind of long-term plans are as we see more of those developments going in and more need to cross like large unsafe roads. So there's the raised crosswalks on a 2-lane road. I don't know if that would work on a 4-lane road, but I realize this is not CFP, but as we're talking about crossings, I think we're getting ourselves into kind of a situation with when we put something on Bothell Highway and then like the corner stores on the other side or Safeways on the other side, then we're asking people to really either drive or risk it. And it kind of worries me as we look at the future.
So that's a lot of what all this discussion just in the last few questions are the safety program. And a lot of that safety program is working with all the departments to figure out how to approach this. Each road has a little bit of a different look to it, 5-lane roads, 4-lane roads, 2-lane roads, local streets, destinations. In a lot of locations, you have an intersection, so if you signalize it, you're okay. Nowadays, even 4-way stops get scary. So a lot of the traditional methods are not necessarily working as well as they used to. And so there's new things coming out and new ways of looking things. And I think the city staff is trying to work through all that and come up with a game plan of progression and how we're going to look that smartly. Because the minute we do one in one location, and even if we call it a pilot program, you know that there's going to be tons of requests for all over the place. And if we don't do exactly the same thing, or if we do the exact same thing without being thoughtful about it, we might create a situation for ourselves that we don't want to back out of. So we recognize that, and we're actually working on it. And I will tell you, just so you know how quickly we're working on it, this group basically at the next meeting or the meeting after, so either August or early September, I believe this group will start talking about speed humps and things as a tool. So what we're trying to do is work as a city to make sure we understand what our tool basket is and how we're going to apply those tool baskets. Because we don't want to start with a raised crosswalk, which might cost us $200,000, when we can start with something else that we can afford in more locations. And then if things don't work in certain locations, we kind of ramp it up a little bit. There's just not that resources. So we really do kind of have to be thoughtful about it.
I appreciate that, and also that the same solution's not going to work across the city, and that the second you have something that works in one spot, I'm going to be like, oh, I want that over there, or, you know, because you're balancing a lot there. So I appreciate that it's a thoughtful, you know, what can we sustain? I like the toolbox approach versus like, you get this and you get this and everybody gets the same thing. That was going to be an Oprah reference, but I lost it.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the safety program as well in terms of lighting. And so I know that right now in the summertime when it's light out late, it's not seen as much of a problem, but there are certain intersections that have even seen relatively recent improvements for the roadway and not for the lighting system. And so I'm wondering if we're waiting for funding to come through, like sound transit access improvements, for lighting as well, or, you know, WashDOT, bus stops, to push the lighting scheme, or are we trying to do it more strategically through the safety program?
I think the way I think we need to do it is threefold. So we have large projects. So when I come back in September, you're going to see our project list, and there are big projects. Because we're looking for big things. We're looking for protected sidewalks, protected bike lanes, and it gets expensive and large. When we have a large project like Bothell Way, theoretically those safety issues should be in there. So we should be putting lighting, like Bothell Way will be lit up. And there are certain lighting levels at intersections that should be achieved by that. The second way is through our safety program. So if we notice a crossing, it could just be a rapid flashing beacon crossing, not an intersection. And one of the issues we notice is it's kind of dark. One of the safety things we could do there is put lights. And I think in one of our grants, I think we wrote that in. So that's the second way. And then the third way is through looking at our design standards. And although we have lighting standards in there, some of the other safety things we're looking at is we're looking at our lane widths and how we put things together geometrically as well. So I think primarily those three things. When we're retrofitting and we're working with sound transit, we try to advocate for as much as we can get. Sometimes we can't get it all. Sometimes we can get this portion of a street lit because they're putting in a sidewalk. Sometimes in terms of intersections, we're not as successful with that. And that would be something we would have to look at via the safety program unless there was an intersection improvement. So as an example, the last intersection on 185th that I'm still holding out there is 102nd Avenue. May need one in the future, just because in the PM, people are trying to get onto 185th. So if we do an intersection improvement there, then that would have the lights there. Yep.
That makes sense. Thanks.
I have a couple of questions. You mentioned creating yearly funds for equipment replacement and resiliency projects, which I think is a really good plan to at least have some money set aside for those kind of ongoing goals. But I guess want to ask, how will you monitor to find out, are those the right amounts for those funds?
That's a great question. And I put in the traffic equipment one based on 2 years of knowledge. I don't have a long list of knowledge and how we've been doing that in the future. So that will be a wait and see. And the resiliency, the type of work we're trying to do, I described some of them, UPS, uninterrupted power systems, gauges, cameras, analysis of a sliding slope might cost us $100,000. So we can't get everything done in each year. it's going to be over a period of time. So that is our best guess at this point. And I think a few years from now, we will readdress that and see how well it's doing. Kind of like our bridge program. I don't know how they ever came up with $125,000 a year, but it works. And so we've never had to increase it that. So, yeah, so great question.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that you will monitor that. I expect that, even inflation, right? Like there's reasons to have to adjust it over time. So on slide 11, you have this lovely traffic equipment box that apparently needs some repair or replacement. I wanted to request that when specifically this kind of thing happens, like utility boxes that are off on the side of the road, could you partner with our Parks Department, with our Parks and Art Commission to wrap those with art so they're not just exposed utility things?
Yeah, I think we can. Yes, I've seen them wrap many different locations. I don't know what, that would be a program in itself. I think different areas with different things. We did something similar in the downtown. If the backflow check valves downtown, if you don't know them, they have like some historic pictures on them and things. So it becomes kind of a cool way of interacting as well. So yes, we can certainly do that. I think it's a resource thing of how much time do we want to, staff time do we want to stick into it.
Yeah, I drive around other cities and I enjoy public art in general, but when I see that in other cities, I was like, when do we get to do it? So here's my chance to say something. So thank you.
I wanted to provide some feedback on some of the Planning Commission feedback. So just layering it on. But I understand the concern about the new pedestrian bridge over the Sammamish River being seen as sort of like a new shiny object. But I know that sort of the existing ways that people access the Sammamish River Trail are kind of problematic because they depend on private properties. And I was wondering if you had any additional information after the Planning Commission met to discuss a couple of those like access issues. Did you have any? No, you didn't.
We haven't had time to look at that. Just
Okay.
as I think it would. What I've requested is put a little more funding in the East Riverside Drive Trail for planning purposes with King County, and I think part of that discussion would be access to those locations. Those could be certainly in that, but we have not had time in the last few weeks to specifically address that.
That's fine. Yeah, I'm just I don't want to lose an opportunity to sort of partner with King County on that, especially with the trade-off being waiting for a generation to get washed out on 195th. And so I think I understand where the Planning Commission was coming from with seeing the need to reprioritize or possibly looking at the different projects and not really quite prioritizing them the way that council had seen. But I'd still like to move forward with the bridge project in terms of feasibility and looking into that. So that was just my feedback based on my read of the Planning Commission.
Are you going to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to wait because he's writing.
Okay.
I'm being polite.
Sorry.
No, I take your notes. That's important.
Okay, thank you.
I had wanted to ask about the heat maps feedback. I am someone who can't use it professionally, but I enjoy GIS, if that's how you say it. I'm looking at you, but I don't know if it's GIS or GIS. But what would be the difference in goals between the heat maps and the versus like the map of projects? Like there are traffic projects on there, so I guess I'm wondering, what was the goal of a heat map versus the mapping that we already have?
Maybe go back, oops, sorry, go back one more. Perfect, thank you. Not really a heat map, but I think what we did was we tried to show in red, and we didn't define what type of projects we had a couple weeks. So we tried to put every single project in the CFP that we could show up in a map. Your safety program does not show up in a map. But what it does is it just gives you an idea where those projects are. And as example, the darker shaded area hires composite socioeconomic vulnerability. So you would want to make sure that if you have 0 projects in that zone, maybe we need to look at this a little bit. So you look at the spread to make sure that you look at it and go, okay, we don't think we've ignored a portion of the city that we shouldn't ignore. I will tell you, a 7-year period is not a very long period for transportation projects, especially big ones. So we're going to do something similar for the comprehensive plan, which is a 20-year plan. And that's, I think, I think that one we should really look at, because over a 20-year period, you want to make sure that you've looked at where your projects are, and they're not all in one area, but they are strategically placed, and we feel like we haven't left a certain community out, perhaps. And again, this is based, I believe this is, I'm not sure, but it's almost like census blocks, pretty large. So it's kind of a high elevation. Can you go to the second one? There's a couple more maps we can use, and we're not quite there. This was more of a resiliency one, but we just used this one because it has a lot of things on it. It has schools, it has critical facilities, it has manufactured communities. So it kind of shows you where those transportation projects are going to be relative to that. There's one more that shows map that we've been using that shows where the manufactured homes are, and it kind of gives more of a heat map kind of thing. I will say that a lot of the projects, I noticed that's a lot coming down the middle of Bothell. But remember, a lot of those projects are driven by sound transit, getting through 185th. So we bring BRT, and to make sure we do Bothell Way to get Swift down the middle as well. So there's a reason why those projects are there. Yeah.
Well, and the more people that take the arterials, the less people are cutting through neighborhoods. Like the more efficient you can make them.
Hopefully, and that's the thought. Yep.
Okay, I think I misunderstood. I was thinking more of an ongoing heat map, and I was trying to make that make sense with the mapping that's already available.
I think, the tools we have right now, I think we're doing better and better. I think another 5 years when we do a check, in 10 years when we'll have much better, more detailed tools, and I think it'll show up better how we're addressing different communities and making sure that connectivity, we're not just connecting, the northeast side of the city, we're actually addressing all the different parts of the city and where we think should be addressed.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I also wanted to echo Councilmember Curd about I think the importance of the Sammamish River pedestrian bike bridge going forward, in part because of the reasons that he stated, but also because there are people across the region who are looking for us to complete those connections and improve that area. And so, on council, we're hearing from East Trail and, kind of all over, hey, Bothell has these tricky kind of connections between, across the freeway and around the waterway and all of that. And I think that that's partly why council would be supportive of prioritizing it. So thank you.
I'd just jump in on that, and I don't like it when we pit good things against each other. I think it should be a yes and. I don't think we should look at not doing something because there's another project that needs to be done. I think we should try to figure out a way to do as many as we can. So I also would not be supportive of deprioritizing that, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it's important that we do what we can across 195th. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes back from those conversations.
And I'm going to yes and the mayor, that because of the point I just made that it is a regional project, I would hope that there would be regional grants that we could seek out and apply for, so we don't have to deprioritize other things. We could then, in the grant making process, tell the story of this is important regionally, so please, regional partners, support. Thank you.
We're hinting toward the next conversation now.
Yeah.
Well, this is great feedback and great questions. So we'll take all your inputs back and come up with the next iteration. Again, thank you so much for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. All right, I have a request for a break. Sorry, Shelley. It's 8:20. We're going to break for 10 minutes. We'll be back at 8:30.
Recording stopped.
GIS.
Okay. Some are pronounceable and some aren't. Stop trying to make just happen.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Next up is Agenda Bill 24128. It's the study session to review and provide feedback on the first draft of the 2025-2026 State Legislative Agenda and Policy Manual. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And for your last item before September 3rd, we do have another study session tonight. As you'll recall, we are getting an earlier start on development of the legislative agenda this year. And so Council has been able to provide some feedback individually to our state lobbyist, Shelley Huller, who is joining us tonight. And the intent for tonight is to bring some of those themes back together, share draft agenda and policy manual, and get some feedback. Shelley will walk us through the process and where we are and what you'll expect to see, but mainly tonight is an opportunity for initial feedback from the council. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our state lobbyist, Shelley Huller.
Good evening. It is good to be with you all in the flesh. Thanks for having me and for this time. So as the city manager said, tonight I'm going to begin with providing a little bit of an overview of what we expect for the 2025 session, and then we'll jump into how you as a city can begin preparing for that session. It should advance. There we go. Okay. So this is just a quick overview. Like I said, I'll cover the 2025 legislative session expectations, a quick summary of the document development process. So this is the process that we're going through right now. I will review the draft 25-26 legislative agenda. We'll discuss the draft policy manual, and then we'll wrap up talking about the next steps. So the 2025 session is the first year of the two-year legislative cycle, which is referred to as the biennium. And in accordance with the state constitution, it is no longer than 105 days. The kind of the main task of the legislature is that they need to adopt new budgets. And they have historically adopted 3 budgets: operating, capital, and transportation. In addition to developing the budgets, they also consider thousands of policy bills, which are proposed changes to state law. For some context for each of the 3 budgets, in June of 2024, the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council released what they expect the revenue, or what they project the revenue to be. And there's a decrease of roughly $500 million in operating revenues from when the previous forecast was released. So from the February forecast to the June forecast, a decrease of $500 million. The current state budget has capacity to absorb that amount. So it's not an urgent concern right now. Why it's worth mentioning is because if that decrease continues, essentially if there is not the growth in revenue as it has been projected, then that will have implications for the development of the new budget, because there's going to naturally be cost increases. And if the revenues don't keep pace, then there'll either need to be cuts or discussion of new revenue. So that's the operating side. For the transportation budget, it is expected to continue to be constrained. We've already begun to hear some conversations about a new revenue package, and I'll get into that more in a minute. And then finally, the capital budget, which is the smallest of the three budgets. It's traditionally, well, the capital budget size is a function of the operating budget. It's not a direct correlation, but it's a formula. And the capital budget has grown every year that the operating budget has grown. And in recent years, it's actually grown exponentially because of an increase in federal resources. It's not expected to grow at the rate it has been. And in fact, I've been hearing that the capital budget should be about the size that it was in the last biennial budget, which is $9 billion. So what that means practically is the various grant buckets that we saw funded in the last budget, we're likely to see funded at similar levels in this upcoming budget. For the political context, it's a little bit of a, guessing the writing on the wall. I don't expect there to be major shifts in political majorities, but there are several legislators that have retired, are not running for re-election, and so there will be lots of new faces in the 2025 legislature. There are 3 initiatives on the November ballot that are going to have impacts on state budgets if they are passed. And come November as well, once we know the outcome of the legislative races, there will be a committee on committees, is what it's called, that determine what the committees will be in the legislature. So they don't necessarily carry over the same committees each year. So they develop the jurisdiction for the committees as well as who the chairs will be and who the various members will be on those committees. And that will occur in the November-December timeframe. So this is just a quick reminder of the city's legislative documents. So it's 2 documents and they serve really specific purposes. The legislative agenda is what lists the legislative priorities, and it's 3 to 5 priorities, and that's a recommended best practice to make sure that we focus our legislators' attention on the items that are most important to you all. They can be funding requests, or they can be requests for changes to state law. The policy manual is a more comprehensive document, and there is no limitation on the size. It is intended to be a resource and allow the city to engage in bills that are brought up throughout the legislative session in a timely manner. It is, as I mentioned, supposed to be a resource both for me as your voice in Olympia, as well as city staff, for you all as you're engaging with your colleagues and other jurisdictions to know, well, what is it as a council that we have taken positions on already? So this shows where we are in the process of developing the city's legislative documents. After meeting with the executive leadership team, the mayor, each of the council members, and then following up with specific city staff based on input from you all, I met with city manager and deputy city manager, and we're at the point in the star right there where we're discussing these draft documents. Based on your feedback, we will make changes and refine these documents and then bring them back for you for adoption. So without further ado, these are the draft priorities for the 25-26 legislative biennium. And I just want to mention quickly, when I talk about the city's legislative agenda or the city's policy manual, I refer to it as 25-26 because that is the calendar year that we're going to be using these documents. When we talk about the state's budget, it's 25-27 because the state follows a fiscal year for the budget. So I just want to specify that because it can get a little bit confusing depending on which document you're looking at. So, And again, we adopt the budget to follow the state's 2-year process. If things on the legislative agenda are accomplished in the first year, then we make adjustments to reflect that in the lead up to the second year. So I will provide kind of brief description of each of these, and then I want to pause and get your input, feedback, questions. So the first item is the preservation of Shelton View Forest. And in my conversations with mayor and council, this was one of the topics that came up in every single conversation. And so to me, that was really telling that it is a priority for each one of you. and likely reflective of it being a priority of the city. So I know the city staff have been working with Department of Natural Resources for several years to try to find a path forward. And I know that those conversations are ongoing. But in any scenario, we know that funding is needed. And so this potential priority would jointly consider both a change to state law to perhaps reduce what the cost could be, as well as pursue funding for the transfer of the property. To be candid, I'm still doing my homework on this item to know if it makes sense to pursue it in the 25-26 cycle. There's some grant funding that is essentially the grant process is already completed for this upcoming biennium. And so if that is going to be a make or break issue, we may want to wait until the next biennium. So I'm putting it here and recommending it as the priority right now because it is clearly important to you all. And so long as there's not a clear roadblock and no way that it could be accomplished in this biennium, I think it makes sense to continue to pursue. The next item is multimodal connections. And so, as you all know, the city has a complete streets approach to improvements. Of course, you all have a bike plan, a capital facilities plan, which you were just discussing. And those documents all rank the projects and the priorities that you have. So this draft priority, I've titled it multimodal connections, but that's under construction. All of these are under construction and they're open for your input. So this would request a lump sum of funds from the state to use towards the implementation of key projects that are identified in city planning documents. And I will say that this is a little bit of an unconventional way of approaching a state funding request. Historically or traditionally, what you do is you have a project and you have a dollar amount and you go for that amount. This would be, we want a lump sum and we want it to go towards these projects or this planning document. And even though it's unconventional, I think it's worth considering. And we can always pivot if we need to, but it keeps that option flexible for us. The other reason that I think this is worth considering as a priority is because depending the outcome of the November ballot or cycle, Climate Commitment Act revenues are available for investment in communities who are serious about reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. And so projects that are making investments in active transportation are eligible, could compete for that funding source. And so depending on how we structure this, that would be my recommendation for the funds that we pursue for that item. The next priority is the Woodcrest Utility Improvement Project. And this project actually did not explicitly come up in conversations with you all, but it was on several different conversations mentioned that wanted to complete projects that have already been started or have some funding secured. And we're really looking for recommendations from Public Works as far as the high priority infrastructure projects. And this one falls into both of those categories. Just as a reminder, the project is an update to the water and sewer infrastructure in the Woodcrest neighborhood, and it's a $7.4 million project. The city's already secured roughly $1 million from federal funds, and then there's an additional roughly $1.1 million that's pending. And so we would be requesting at the state level $1.9 million from the state capital budget to help complete the construction phase. And I will note 1.9 is an ambitious number when it comes to a capital budget request. And anytime we pursue state funding, there's always a chance you're going to get less than what you request for. But there would be the expectation that the project is completed in a relatively timely manner. oops, no. So then the next is removing barriers to housing. And it's no surprise there continues to be a shortage of housing in our state. And across the board, there's a recognition that the legislature still has more work to do on this. You're probably familiar that in 2021, the legislature passed House Bill 1220, and that has set housing targets for communities for Bothell specifically. We need to accommodate an additional 13,000 housing units, 97 by 2040, 9,700 of which need to be below 80% AMI. So in my conversations with you all, I heard a consistent theme, which was a desire to reduce the cost of housing construction. And there were different ideas that were brought up in the description of this in the draft legislative agenda. Some of the items that were suggested were investing in workforce development, and particularly the construction and building trades industry. Offering financial offsets for cities who choose to reduce impact fees for developers, or providing more resources to streamline permitting so that the permitting process is more predictable. So those are just a few suggestions. I think this would be a policy priority that we would proactively engage in, those policies that have the outcome of removing barriers to housing construction. And then the last item is something that I'm kind of calling on the horizon, and this would be at the bottom of the agenda, and it's really we would want to flag that there's additional investment needed for the Bothell Way Multimodal Improvement Project. The state's already allocated $7 million to the project, and that's dispersed over this current transportation budget as well as the next. And but we know that the project's going to need additional funding, specifically in the 29-31 cycle. And so we're kind of putting a stake in the ground to say, hey, state, in a few years, we're going to need additional support. And I think there's two reasons for doing that. One, there's already conversations about a transportation revenue package. And when the state develops those packages, they typically do them over the last two have been over 16-year horizon. So if we want money in 29-31 and the package is developed in 2025, we need to be asking in 2025. The second is if there is no transportation revenue package in 2025, then we at least want to kind of get in line for a project of this size, a request of this size. It's because transportation revenues are so scarce. We want to make sure that our delegation as well as state budget writers are aware that this is an upcoming need. Okay, so I'm going to pause there before I move on to talk about the policy manual and see if there's any comments or questions. And I guess my specific question for you all is, do you see things that you think need to be a priority missing, and or do you have refinements to the priorities that you see here?
Thank you. Very comprehensive, and I read the packet ahead of time.
Great.
And which is very informative. Thank you. I don't have a problem with the priorities. I think they're good, and you suggested a few times like we'll make the ask, and if it doesn't work, we'll just figure it out as we go. Speaking of figuring it out as we go, the multimodal lump sum or the connections that we asked for, give us a pool of money, and we'll just figure out what to do with it. Do we have a list of projects that because you said it's unconventional, so if whoever you're talking to says, I can't make that happen, but give me 2 or 3 projects you want and the dollar amounts, do we have those lists?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah. I've already worked with the number that we have in the legislative agenda is 20 million over three biennia, so 3 cycles. And we're doing it over 3 cycles because that'll increase our chance that we get the funding, and that realistically that it takes that long to deliver that many projects of that size. So yes, Public Works staff has recommended the projects. I should have printed them out. I don't have them with me, but they're projects that are highly ranked on the CFP and overlaid with the bike plan, kind of the ones that make sense.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the other question I have is, do you want to add to this? Wow. The barriers to housing, the things that you suggested or that were listed as examples, are those what you're going to specifically be asking for, or is it, in general, what can the state do for us also?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. The ones that I've listed, I have heard conversations about those kind of percolating already, so I think it's a little bit of direction from you all. Of those, do any of them make a lot of sense and would really move the needle, or are those examples that we want to use to then kind of support other topics that may come up?
It might be good. I don't know, actually, it might vary from a project to project. How much it will affect. One of the things that are very expensive, I know, is land purchase. And if there's something that, maybe that's not directly related to the city of Bothell, but is statewide, if developer wants to develop something, the state can subsidize the purchase of the land. Maybe that can also reduce, in addition to the other things that were mentioned, like lowering impact fees and these things. And I don't know if that's something that's feasible or not, but I feel like that's, as land cost prices keep going up and things get more expensive, that might be something that the state can help with as well, because we have only so many pieces of land that we can use for purposes of that lower AMI, specifically for lower AMI projects, not for, the higher ones, the above 120%. So that's the thing that I think maybe just figuring out how to approach that, since the biggest cost is the land. Yep. I'm assuming, I don't know, maybe impact fees are higher than land costs, then we have to have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's it. And I can't believe we're talking about 2025 already.
I'll jump in on the housing one. I'm a huge fan of the workforce development. You need people, tradespeople to build, and you're constrained by capacity if we don't have that. I feel like over the last 20 years, 30 years, we've not done a good job of encouraging people to go into the trades and help them know that you can make a good living in the trades. And if you were an entrepreneur, that's a track too within the trades. So I'm very supportive of that. I think the other piece is there's a risk in developing, and if we can find a way to somehow lower the risk and encourage the developers to develop. Maybe they're sitting on a parcel, they're like, not sure if it's going to pencil, but if we can get them to go and not just sit on it for 2, 3, 5, 10 years and wait till I think it's going to pencil, those things I think will help get the job going.
Yeah.
On the topic of workforce development, this is just not something I'm super familiar with, would that include programs that help people switch careers? I remember when I was at Lake Washington Technical College 7 years ago, there was a guy who had been laid off and he was switching industries in the same program I was in there. And what I see amongst either friends of mine or my kids, friends' parents, is sometimes it's like, okay, I'm ready to switch into something, but I have to feed my family while I'm in college or in school. So would that include that kind of sort of mid-career shift as well?
Yeah, one of the things that's kind of been percolating within the conversation about workforce development for construction trades is expansion of apprenticeship programs and specifically paid apprenticeship programs. So I think the answer is yes, but maybe not fully. It's not fully there yet, not fully baked.
That makes sense. And then there's obviously a connection, and I leave it to you to how to even put this, in front of people. But one of the things that really struck me at a conference I went to recently was that if you build permanent supportive housing, you then need housing for people making 50 to 60% AMI to staff the permanent supportive housing. And we heard from people in public comment saying, I need skilled people who would need this housing as workforce housing for a proposed project here. So the other part of that is housing, right? Workforce development, then also places to live near where we're building things. So there's a lot of harmony there.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting this together. I think that you really did take what you heard and made a very strong list of priorities for the city. Is there a cost associated with the preservation of Shelton View Forest that legislators might need to consider?
Yes, but it's unknown at this
It is
point.
unknown, so we can't put a number in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
That, and I will say the language that's drafted in the draft legislative agenda document is, I made sure to put a draft watermark on it intentionally, not only because it's not approved by you all, but because I expect that the language may change as I do more outreach on the viability of that request.
I think even like including
like a ballpark.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
not like including like funds that could go towards the purchase. Maybe not even a ballpark. But right now, it's just like help us with it almost sounds like it's saying help us through the process of getting this land transferred.
Mm.
But it doesn't necessarily say we might need help purchasing this. Could you please contribute funds?
A little bit more explicit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the Woodcrest, like that's super, super clear and direct. The multimodal connections, I wanted to, like, it's kind of, I'm really glad you have that list of projects. Is the Sammamish pedestrian bike bridge one of those projects? You don't have it in front of you, but that was what we talked about in our last study session as part of a regional connection. And so perhaps that is obviously where it would connect, but just to make sure that it's included in those proposed.
Yeah.
And we'll get an update out to council since this is an early look. We'll get that shared before we're coming back.
Yep. And I will say for the ones that the intent of a legislative agenda is to have a single document that summarizes your priorities. But for some of these, you can't adequately summarize this in 3 sentences. You really need more, which is the purpose of a one-pager that would be developed in order to supplement this information. And that would be where we would list like the specifics about what the projects are.
Great. So I look forward to that update. And then the last thing that I wanted to add on these priorities is about housing construction. We're talking about trying to attract people into construction trades. I was at a conference for the National League of Cities, and I was introduced to the concept of returnships. And I realized that stereotypically we might think that only people going into construction are men, but there are women and people who had been stay-at-home parents who may be re-entering the workforce and might want to get into construction. And so I just wanted to connect, like if we're talking about building workforce, returnships might be a way to help people who've historically been just not represented in those trades to have more of an involvement in it. So thanks for letting me say that.
I'll jump in. Thanks for this. I agree with all of the legislative priorities. One of the things that makes me excited to do legislative outreach is being able to share a story. And I think that the Woodcrest Utility Improvement Project, because we already have federal funding and because it's a story that we can tell that impacts residents, it impacts the community at large. I really appreciate you looking into that and staff to choose such an important and relevant project that lends itself well to storytelling. That makes our job easy. I agree with the other things that have been said for multimodal connections. I think it's more of like an acceleration fund because we're planning to do these projects anyway, but the seed money that we get or the additional funds that we would get from the legislature could help keep costs down, implement them faster, and have a bigger impact to the community if they're done earlier in conjunction with other transit improvements and stuff. So, or housing development. So that's a suggestion there. The removing barriers to housing construction, I think we should keep it broad because there are so many different aspects and we want to be kind of opportunistic when the year of housing 3 or maybe not comes through. We want to be able to be flexible. So I just really encourage us to keep that broad and whatever opportunities do come up, we can sort of build on. We can add to based on that. And I really appreciated what Councilmember Aldrich said about other people joining the field of construction, and that goes for BIPOC and other underserved communities too. And I know in my line of work, there's a real strong emphasis on encouraging curriculum development that caters and appeals and is culturally sensitive to a wide variety of different backgrounds. And so that could probably be something that we think about in housing construction fields too. Thanks.
I'm going to jump in real fast and just say cosign like all of this. I really appreciated what Councilmember Curd said about removing barriers to housing construction, because we don't know what bills are going to get introduced this year, and I'd really like to be flexible. Like, if we're keeping this very general, I'd also just continue to mention housing supply in neighboring jurisdictions as well. I would imagine there's going to be a TOD bill coming back again this year. And just whatever we write, I want to make sure we've got the flexibility to support things like that.
I do want to jump back in. One of the complicating factors of HB 1220 is that our partnership with Arch specifically will no longer count towards our units unless there is a change in state law. And so I don't know if it's just as simple as there's now an exemption so that Arch units can count towards our 1220, even though those units would count in all the jurisdictions that are available in Arch. But we can't undercut Arch's work just because we need to do HB 1220. And so I want to make sure that the legislature is aware of that and has a proposal to continue to sustain their work. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback. So moving on to talk about the draft policy manual. And I do not plan to review each item in this document. I trust that you all have read it and will provide your feedback accordingly. But I do just want to offer some comments on it. First, the document is color-coded to align with the items in your 2040 City Council vision. So as you'll see, there's the categories from that vision document are connecting neighborhoods for one city, economic vitality, and so on. And so that's reflected in the document. Hopefully, the intent there is to make sure that these visioning documents that you've put work into developing are then guiding your engagement in state policies so that you're reaching the vision as opposed to it just being a theory. The items in the policy manual are both input from you all, as well as input from city staff and consideration of issues that the legislature will likely come up in the next session. Again, this is intended to be a resource document, and so it's organized loosely by city department, and then within that, it's listed alphabetically. So I'll pause and just see if there's any comments or questions about the policy manual, and I'll make sure that this isn't the only opportunity to provide input, but if you do have any, it's welcome.
It's pretty straightforward. I think the organization is just hugely helpful. I don't know if I love the acronyms, but it is helpful. It is useful to kind of keep oriented throughout reading it. And so thank you for just incorporating our vision document into your work too. I don't think I knew that was going to happen, and so I'm pleasantly surprised. Under the human services section, there's one thing that I noticed that we are, just like we are members of K4C and we adopt their legislative agenda to say hey, we co-sign onto that because we're part of that. I also want to kind of reserve the opportunity to do that for human services as well, because we are a part of various coalitions that connect us to the broader North King County and East Side. We get both. And so, like, for example, the Eastside Human Services Forum doesn't have a legislative agenda yet, so I'm not entirely sure what that process is going to look like, but I do think something about pointing towards our regional partners' goals to say that we share those goals would be a nice addition. And that's all I saw, because otherwise I thought, like, and to the point of, like, this is neatly correlated to our current city goals. It also represents, like, AWC's legislative goals as well, and I see those woven in. So great job.
One of the things that I was reading through was in the public safety under police department staffing, support policies and funding for staffing and recruitment of police officers. Bothell is focused also on retention. And so I'm wondering if maybe an addition of a word there could maybe mean we have a closer eye on some bills and not others. So I'd suggest adding that there. But the other ones, I echo Councilmember Aldrich's. I really appreciate the eye to detail and the connections with our other goals and documents.
I'll jump in and just echo the ability to retain. I think that's really important. I'm glad you called it out, Councilmember Curd. It's one of our challenges in keeping people. Just, I think broadly, most departments are having trouble with that, but we've seen data showing that pattern here as well. The one item that I zoned in on that I prefer to add a little bit of language to is the restorative justice piece. I love that we're moving towards restorative justice. I think it's incredibly important to restore somebody into society when they exit the criminal justice system. When you don't do that, it limits their opportunity. It doesn't bring them back into the community. There's not a lot of success. I think we need to be careful and balance it out with ensuring that we're still saying, we want to have accountability in our justice system. So I would like to see language around, and I don't know if there's consensus for this, but maintaining accountability, but ensuring restoration in the community through the restorative justice process.
I'll jump in on that one real quick. I feel like accountability is already just like the term justice. Like, I feel like accountability is pretty inherent in the criminal justice system. I don't know that needs to, like, I guess I don't know that I see the need.
Sure. Yeah, I'll add a little bit more color around why I'm saying that. I think we've seen some instances where we've gone the route of diversion, which is also good, but there's not been accountability in diversion. So people have been diverted, but then not following the diversion process, and nobody's following up. And then you end up with, victims of crimes who are looking at that saying, I was victimized. There's no accountability for the person who victimized me, and there's nothing I can do about it. So just want to make sure that there's accountability there. The person who has committed the crime has acknowledged it, has gone through that process, and is coming out and being restored to the community. And I think that encompasses justice for everybody involved, and making sure that every person as part of that process is ending up in a position where they can be, the word is not proud of the justice system, but they feel like that the justice system worked and they were able to go through the process, and at the end, things were as they should have been.
Can I ask a question just for a minute? So let's take this scenario, and I don't mean to take much longer. I just want to understand. So somebody goes through they go do, did a crime or whatever, and then they say, go community service, for example. And then they go and commit yet another crime. Won't they go back into the step one again anyway? Like, isn't that part of our system already?
Yeah, they would. I just want to make sure that, as part of the restorative justice process, there's a meeting usually of the person who commits the crime and the person who the crime is committed against, and they try to, bring them together and have conversation, and impact is kind of conveyed. It's not forcing the victim to be a part of that, but opening the process up for healing to happen on both sides, and then restoring the person, the community. I have concern that if we don't continue to include the perspective of the victim and ensure that there is accountability there will be repeats in the future. And, we can restore somebody, and then if they repeat and because they weren't held accountable, that doesn't make the whole process work really well. So I just want to make sure that there is an accountability to, the crime that's been committed, but then make sure we, as quickly as we can, restore the person into the community and make sure they're successful in moving on from whatever had occurred and being successful in life from then on out.
Sounds fair.
If I can speak to that just for a moment. The term restorative justice is actually very specific as like a field of practice and study. And I think that that all of what you're saying is incorporated into that and exists within that framework already. Because that's literally what it's designed to do and to be. But you do bring up a good point that I just want to bring forward, that it is not lost on me that our prison system is the largest mental health provider in the state. And that there are more people in prison receiving mental health services than people outside of prison. Like it's kind of amazing how that works. And if we're talking about actual restoration, prison is not, putting somebody in a cell and making them sit with themselves without any kind of supportive reflection is just punishment. And if we're going to talk about really getting serious about restoring people through, if they're in prison, then we need to be giving them supports and contact in terms of like motivational therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, helping them overcome the motivations that led them to commit the crimes that they committed, so that they can be restored, like emotionally, personally, so they're not re-offending, because there's no more motivation to do that harm. And so I think that we need to look at prisons not just as places of punishment, but as places of healing. And if there are people who are in prison who should be getting mental health services outside of prison, I am all for diverting them outside of the prison system. We should not be punishing people for having mental health disabilities. But of those, even those who are there without a mental health disability of any kind, there is still a need for them to work on themselves and to have support through that process. So I would love to see something added about the restorative efforts in the prison system as well. And really, as a community and as a state, starting to have those conversations about what does it mean to be rehabilitated. So you have, I'm gonna quote scripture, I'm sorry, no more desire to do evil. That's what I hope we could accomplish through the criminal justice system. And so how do we put that in there without using scripture? Thanks.
I think that goes along with what my intent is. It's accountability to change, accountability to not remain the same person that did that action, and to grow and to seek help if they need help or whatever it may be. So some people just don't want to do that. They don't even think that what they did was wrong or have any remorse for it, and that's tough. Like when you get in that situation, I don't know what we do with that, because obviously putting them in a cell is only going to buy us time until they get out to commit additional crime. But I think having people commit to change, the needed change in their lives, is something that we should hold people accountable to, so that in the future we don't have the same reoccurrence, and that they can move on again, and we restore them and we bring them back into society and we help them be successful. So that's really my intent behind it. It's not, I don't think that anybody sitting in a prison cell for 10 years is gonna change them on their own. Like, that's just, it's unhelpful. There is a process they need to engage in, but my real big concern is that people do commit to that change, and then also that the victims don't get forgotten about. And they can be, again, proud is not the word, but this, when the person gets out, that they have committed to that change and they've done the things they need to do, and they can help them forgive and move on, the victim to forgive and move on from whatever happened to them. So I won't harp on this one anymore, but that's just kind of my thoughts and my heart around bringing this up.
They would restore. I really like Councilmember Aldrich's suggestion to not just limit it to the court system, to talk about the prison system or the entire criminal justice system as well. And just given the number of words we have expended to clarify and talk through this and this, I don't know that I see a way to include this conversation in a bullet point, but these might be better conversations for us to have, should there be legislation that it's relevant to, and deciding whether or not to support or what particular pieces of that legislation we'd support, because this, after this conversation, feels like it could be a 5-pager all on its own. And so given the scope of what we're doing, like I love the idea of including the entire criminal justice system, and I just don't know that I see a path to have this conversation on this document.
I think what I'm hearing is that definitely there needs to be more clarification for this item, but perhaps in the clarification that there could be a kind of best practice definition of what restorative justice is, so we're not all bringing our own interpretation to that. So I think I can work on some draft language and see if that kind of scratches the itch that you guys are getting at.
Awesome.
I appreciate that we've talked about incarceration as rehabilitation, as we have seen sort of a focus on how much can a company make per prisoner administering the things that they're legally required to. That piece seems to have, I think, fallen off. And I am not a subject matter expert, so I might stumble in saying this. And I think just any recognition that societally, if you imprison someone and they do not have a chance at rehabilitation, that affects their family, obviously the victim's family, future victim's family. Like it perpetuates a cycle that harms not only the victims in a court case, but if the person who's incarcerated has children or family that they caregive for, people aren't just bad, and if we don't acknowledge that we're harming a lot more people by perpetuating this, okay, you did your 10 years and now you're even worse off because we kept you in a small space for 10 years with no chance at learning a skill or improving your health and having a different outcome the next time that you're not, incarcerated, then we're just causing even more harm in what was already clearly harming someone. So however you can summarize that in the document, I would appreciate.
I'm going to change this subject drastically. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, I don't want to catastrophize, but in the event that the CCA is repealed, do we have enough in our legislative agenda here to ensure that transportation projects and projects that ameliorate climate change effects on our city can be funded through creative means? I'm just seeing in our finance section here, like we support flexible revenue, but that bullet point specifically doesn't really talk about looking for, and then progressive revenue is there too, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, in your expertise doing this for other councils and other jurisdictions, are there similar conversations happening about, like, what if CCA fails?
I think that's an excellent observation. And I would say that while we maybe could fit some of these categories into that topic, it would be better if we included something a little bit more explicit. So I think that's worth adding in.
I also kind of look to city manager about possibly return. I know a number of neighboring jurisdictions have kind of put a formal opposition, or they've taken a stance on initiatives, and that's something that I'm sure will come back in the fall. But there's the proactive approach, but there's also the agenda that we have at the legislature, and just ensuring that current sources of revenue that we depend on for a lot of our projects, and a lot of the services that people might be taking for granted need to continue regardless of a ballot initiative. So yeah, that's just kind of top of mind, and I trust that we'll have the tools needed during the legislative session to react, but I'm hoping that maybe something can be added, or we can have some flexibility here.
Okay. So now we'll talk about next steps. So I mentioned this in a previous slide, but this is the first chance to provide input on these draft priorities. I'm going to do some additional research on these items, make sure that we're teed up and have a good strategy to move forward. These will come back before you all after they have been refined and all your input has been incorporated. Once you have adopted those final documents, then we'll meet with the city's delegation, which is the first district, to kind of talk through what your priorities are. And then we'll also meet with additional legislators as needed. Parallel to that process and timeline, things happening at the state level, of course, we have the August primary coming up, then we have the November general election. In the November-December timeframe, the House and Senate will have their committee on committees, and then once the committees are assigned, they'll have your legislative committee days, which I equate to like back to school night. It's kind of like a test run for what the legislative session will be like. And then before we know it, the 2025 session will be here, and it starts on January 13th. So with that, I say questions, but we've been through a lot already, but I still welcome any other comments or questions you may have.
And Shelley, just to interject, echoing feedback from tonight, just exceptional work. Thank you very much. And I think it did really capture, and I'm appreciative of staff's working with you to be able to put some of these things in context. One of the things that's embedded in that next step of the legislative session begins, but it's something that I took note of from the conversation tonight is, again, other great work and support that you provide to us in the form of the weekly legislative updates. And I think for council, much like we're getting ahead of this process a little bit, I think too, as we enter into January and knowing that it'll be a full session again, thinking about how you want to be able to have some of those conversations about if there are bills that come up that put emphasis into things that we couldn't have anticipated 6 months in advance. Let's continue to talk about how you might want to bring those conversations up on Tuesday nights, and again, so that we are able to be responsive to the things that do develop. So I've made a note of that. I think we'll take a look at the strategy for that. But again, I also where I hang my confidence on that, as I do know that, Shelley, you set us up for success on that too by monitoring and anticipating and understanding what the council is looking for and really flagging those for us. So thank you, and to council, I commit to we'll find a way to make sure that those relevant conversations are happening here, so we can go use the voice of Bothell down in Olympia.
I want to second that the weekly updates we get once, they're extremely helpful. Like very helpful, even like they just provide the context as we're even having our discussions, around here when we're talking about tiny projects with, here's how it fits in this larger thing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's very, very helpful to receive that feedback, to know that those are read, because I do spend a lot of time in those. And so it's good to know that it's worth it, that it's appreciated.
And I would just say in general, I just want to echo that appreciation and just say we really appreciate you and Gordon Thomas and the relationship we have. And thank you for all the work you do for us.
My pleasure. Yeah, I enjoy it. Thank you.
All right, we're adjourned.